Good evening, dear listener. Whenever you're ready to drift off, make yourself comfortable and let your breath slow to an easy pace. Tonight, let's quietly explore for gentle corners of the past. We will linger in rooms where steady hands shaped simple materials into things that lasted. Clay marked with patient signs, silk raised in small trays, water lifted by a wooden wheel, and river plants pressed into pale sheets. As you settle in for the night, know that there is nothing you must remember. The stories move softly like lamplight over a table. First, we will step into a Babylonian tablet room where damp clay meets reed and quiet fire. Then we will sit beside a Han Dynasty household and hear silkworms feed with a small, even sound. After that, we will walk a mule garden where an ox turns a Saqiya, sending water along lawn. Calm channels. Finally, we will stand by the Nile to watch papyrus ribbons become smooth pages under a rounded stone. If you like, close your eyes now. Imagine the smell of warm earth, green leaves, cool water, and fresh plant fiber. Each scene arrives unhurried. Let the rhythm of ordinary work help you drift. And when sleep finds you, the stories will continue on their own, keeping a quiet watch until morning. Before ink and paper, some words learn to live in clay. In a small room off a courtyard, bricks keep the day's warmth, jars keep the water still, and reed styluses wait in a shallow tray. Here, scribes teach apprentices to press tiny wedge marks into damp tablets. The work is slow, exact, and kind to the mind. Tonight we will enter as the first light finds the doorway. We will notice the order of things, the clay bin, the mat for drying, the brazier for finishing, and the seal box that carries little stories of its own. Nothing rushes. The room speaks in soft sounds, kneading, smoothing, pressing, and turning. The tablet room wakes before the market does. A clay jar on a low stand wears a damp cloth cap, and a thin trickle runs from its spout into a bowl the size of two hands. The apprentice touches the water with two fingers. Cool enough? He lifts the lid from the clay bin and breathes the faint smell of river mud and last evening's ash. Clay sleeps heavy. It prefers to be reminded of the river each morning. He pours a little water into the bin, not on top, but along the edges, where the clay loosens first. With both palms he folds the mass toward the center, presses, and turns. The movement is calm and regular. Press, lift, quarter turn, press. Now and then he dips his fingers and smooths a dry seam until it agrees to join the rest. A side note belongs here. Even clay responds to kindness. Work too hard, it sulks and cracks. Encouraged gently, it becomes a steady, even body. On the reed mat beside him lie small pads cut from old cloth. He lifts a fist-sized piece of clay onto one pad and shapes it into a neat oval. Thumb palm, then the flat of the hand. Each touch leaves less of a mark than the last. He sets the tablet on a board and draws a light guide line with a blunt reed, not digging, only suggesting. The surface is not a stage, it is a field, and feels like straight furrows. From a shallow tray he chooses styluses, reed stems trimmed to points of different widths, their tips cut at angles that teach wedges how to sit. One has a broader face for headings, one is fine for tight lists, one has a square nose used to draw dividing lines. He lays them in order, points left, as his teacher prefers. A damp cloth waits nearby to keep reed tips from drying between lines. The scribe enters with a small wooden box and a nod that says the room is already doing what it should. He warms his hands above the little brazier, not fire for baking, only a coal bed to coax damp out of finished work when the air is stubborn. From the box he removes a cylinder seal carved with lions and barley heads. It looks like a bead, but it is a promise. When rolled across clay, it will say whose business has been done. First tablet, the scribe says in a voice that is both greeting and instruction. The apprentice lifts the neat oval, rests it on his left palm, and with the right smooths the surface once more with a flat reed. Across the top he draws a faint ruled line. The scribe begins to speak the day's opening list dates, names, measures of grain. He does not hurry. Speech waits for hands, hands wait for breath. The first mark enters the clay with a small, satisfying click. A wedge points right, shallow and sure. Another follows beneath it, then another, stacked like small roofs, each sheltering the next. The stylus lifts, turns slightly, and presses again at a new angle. A sign becomes itself, a shape the city understands. The apprentice breathes out and finds the lines cadence press. Lift, turn, press, lift, turn. A short aside. To modernize these marks can look like decoration. Here they are sentences. Cuneiform signs are made of little wedges, but they are not random. They learned their roles long ago and keep them faithfully. Paper will one day invite curves and ink, but this room trusts angles and pressure. Halfway down the first column, the scribe pauses to moisten his lip, and the apprentice rests the stylus on the damp cloth. He smooths the tablet's edge with his thumb so the border remains tidy. He reads back, not aloud, but with the tip of the reed touching each sign lightly to feel its order. The room is quiet enough that the brazier's faint crackle seems like speech. From the courtyard comes a bowl of water and a reed basket of fresh cuttings. The porter sets them down and leaves without a word. The apprentice selects 3 new reeds, splits each near the tip, trims the slant, and tests the face on a spare lump of clay. The tiny test wedges make a pattern like bird tracks along a river bank. Satisfied, he adds the new tools to the tray, points aligned, damp cloth ready. A second tablet begins, smaller than the first, meant for a quick message to a merchant across town. The scribe dictates in short shapes. The apprentice writes, then takes up a pointed bone awl to pierce a hole near the corner where a cord will pass. He lifts the cylinder seal and, with care, rolls it once across the back of the tablet. The small images appear lions walking among barley heads. It is a gentle theater in one movement. The apprentice smiles, not for pride, but for the pleasure of a device doing exactly what it was made to do. Across the room, on a shelf of baked brick, yesterday's tablets lean like loaves set to cool. Some will be fired hard later in a kiln for long keeping, others will simply dry in air and live until they are no longer needed. The scribe takes one down, feels its weight, taps it with a fingernail, and nods. Dry enough to stack in the storage niche. Marks true, he says, which is the day's best phrase. It means the lines are straight, the signs clear, and the clay has kept its temper. The apprentice rotates the fresh tablet a quarter turn to rest the edge, then another quarter after a few breaths, so that will not change shape as it dries. The reed mat under it leaves a faint woven pattern on the back, a quiet proof of the room itself. By mid-morning, the floor bears a scatter of soft clay crumbs, shaped by shoes into a fine dust. The apprentice sweeps them into a pan. They will go back to the bin with a little water and become tomorrow's sentences. Nothing is wasted here, not clay, not breath, not the slow attention that turns a mass of earth into a page that can be read. If your own thoughts are moving at this pace, press, lift, turn, let them. In the next part, messages will be tied and sealed, larger tablets will meet a slow, cautious heat, and the room's order will teach the hours how to pass without strain. Work continues, as if the air itself had learned the room's rhythm. The apprentice turns to the small message tablet, the one pierced at the corner, and threads a thin cord of twisted fiber through its hole. He ties a modest knot, nothing bold, then presses a pea-sized pinch of wet clay over the knot so that cord and tablet become a single thought. The cylinder seal is lifted, set gently at the clay's edge, and rolled in one smooth pass. Lions and barley walk across the soft dot. The seal does not shout, it simply says, "This passed through these hands." A second tablet, larger, asks for more ceremony. Its corners are faintly rounded, and its surface holds a columned list grain measured in steady lines of signs. The scribe dictates the date line at the head, a regnal year noted in wedges that have done this kind of duty many times before. The apprentice draws a divider with the square-nosed reed, a single groove separating what has been tallied from what will follow next time. He checks spacing with the flat of a fingernail, a small measure that fingers know flawlessly. Some tablets will wear an outer coat, a clay envelope pressed over them like a protective skin. The apprentice needs a thin sheet and lays it, warm and obedient, over the tablet's face. With the fine stylus he copies the first lines onto the outside once more, not as a puzzle, but as a courtesy to future eyes. He leaves a window at the corner where the original peeks through, a proof against forgetting. The envelope receives cord and seal as the small message did, but its clay layer also keeps casual reading at bay until the seal is broken. A side note belongs gently here. In a world where ink is not yet a household companion, trust travels by touch, the feel of cord passing through a hole, the relief of a familiar seal, the slightly different weight of an enveloped page. Reading is a matter for eyes. Keeping is a matter for hands. By the brazier, a shallow tray warms. The coals are low and dark, the heat a suggestion more than a demand. The apprentice lays the small message tablet near the tray's rim first, not over the heat, only within its patience. He turns it now and then, feeling with the back of his fingers, the way one tests bath water for a child. The scribe moves the coals with a stick so that hot and less hot trade places. No hurry, he says, not because anyone intends to hurry, but because words like these keep the room from learning haste by accident. On a side shelf, a ring of clay fired hard, and no longer useful for anything else, serves as a sentinel. The apprentice taps it lightly. The note it gives tells him the heat in the corner of the brazier has stayed kind. Later, if a small kiln is lit in the courtyard, this same ring will be set nearby. Clay has a way of listening to clay. The scribe checks the reed points. A knife of copper with a patient edge trims a tired tip. A quick lick of the finger smooths a stray fiber. The bevel is renewed with 2 careful strokes. He keeps a small pot of water at his knee and touches the stylus to it like a bird to a pool, just enough to remind the reed to behave. If a sign goes wrong, the apprentice does not scrape in anger. He smooths with the flat reed, presses once more, and lets the correction join the line without boasting. Another tablet finishes, a receipt with names that will matter mostly until the barley is taken away in baskets and becomes bread and beer. The apprentice turns the tablet over and presses a short docket, brief words that tell a shelf reader what lives here without reading the whole. He adds to tiny wedges near the lower edges teacher's mark, and the day's number, nothing large, nothing that asked for attention. Only enough that the right tablet finds the right hand again when Nenny stands shoulder to shoulder. Near midday a runner arrives, a boy with dust at his ankles and a basket on his hip. Inside are folded cloths for carrying clay and a pouch of cord. He sets down a slate of fired tiles that will serve as a temporary shelf wherever the tablets must rest before traveling further. The scribe nods toward the sealed message. The boy threads it to the basket's strap with the cord, then ties it once around the basket's handle, so even in jostle it will not decide to explore alone. Another aside, not urgent. Numbers here prefer 6s and 60s. The apprentice has learned to stack values like brick courses, wedge groups that read the way a careful hand lifts and places. Measures of grain squa and gr sit in the lines like quiet containers. He is not asked to love arithmetic, he is asked to keep it steady. The brazier's tray receives a larger tablet's turn, a closer warming, still no flame. The apprentice tilts it, lets air pass underneath, and listens for that near silent change when damp becomes dry enough to trust. A hairline flaw appears at the edge. He smooths it with a thumb dipped in water, then leaves the tablet alone. Clay does not enjoy being managed too much at once. From the courtyard comes the kiln's murmur. Today a half-dozen tablets destined for longer keeping will be fired there, not here. They go in with pots and small bricks that share the heat. The kiln keeper, who knows smoke by scent and clay by color, judges the cycle with a patient eye. The scribe labels a basket for the kiln. The shard of broken tablet with wedges scratched upon it stands in as a taghard, not likely to leave the world in a gust. Shelves receive the morning's work in a manner that looks like tidying but is also a map. Contracts lean together, messages lie face out for the runner. Lists crouch shoulder to shoulder in rows with dockets outward. A small piece of damp clay, pressed flat and punched with 2-finger holes, hangs from a peg, a shelf marker that can be rewritten at day's end when the arrangement changes. The apprentice enjoys this part. Putting things in their place is a kind of writing done without a stylus. The scribe breaks a piece of flat bread, dips it in a shallow dish of oil, and offers the apprentice the larger half as if it were a lesson. They eat without leaving the room. Clay dust and breadcrumbs share the board. The brazier whispers. Heat lines in the air waver. Above it as lightly as answers that do not need words. When work resumes, the cylinder seal returns to its box. The lid slides with a small sound that says enough. The box itself wears a string and a plain knot. No show, only order. The apprentice wipes the reed tray with a damp cloth, then a dry one, and covers it with a square of linen so dust will choose another resting place. He sprinkles a little water over the clay bin's lid and presses it closed so the inside will not forget the river while they pause. By late light, a second runner collects the sealed message into small receipts. He tucks them into a sling that will keep them near his shoulder and away from elbows in the lane. The apprentice watches him go and imagines the path, sun on brick, shade under beam, the smell of bread from an oven, the sound of wheels. The tablets do not hurry there either. They travel at the pace of feet and air. The last task before a short rest is the broom. Not a rough broom, one of date palm midribs bound together for giving to floors. He draws it in long lines to the door, gathers a small hill of clay dust and tips it into a jar marked with a single wedge. Tomorrow's water will persuade this dust to become kneadable again. The room dislikes waste for reasons both practical and polite. If your thoughts feel tied and sealed, no one wants around, marked, and resting near a patient heat, let them keep that binding. In the next part, the kiln will open. Envelopes will crack with a clean sound. And a visiting merchant will weigh tablets in his palm as if truth had a weight he can learn by hand. The kiln in the courtyard has a way of finishing before anyone announces it. The keeper judges by color and the way warmth leaves the mouth of the chamber. He lifts a shard he keeps for this purpose, a piece fired long ago that remembers red glow correctly, and peers past it into the din. The scribe joins without stepping too close. Heat is still a presence, but not a demand. The keeper nods toward a long-handled hook wrapped with linen at the grip. Soon, he says, which here means we will not be impatient. On a plank dusted with ash, yesterday's basket stands ready. The apprentice lifts the damp cloth covering and checks the shard tag scratched with wedges. The tag reads like a quiet address, contract, receipt date, and the mark that matches the teacher's. He sets the plank near the kiln's lip where the air is warm enough to remind hands to be careful. A shallow pan of clean sand waits for cooling tablets to settle into without rocking. The first fired pieces come out glowing only in belief, not to the eye. Heat you see more by the way air wavers. The keeper places each on the sand with the hook's tip. The sand receives the weight as if designed for this. A faint sound answers a dry, tiny note like a seed touching a bowl. The apprentice waits a breath between each, not counting, only listening for the space where heat lets go a little more. One tablet shows a small pale line along an edge, a harmless scar made honest by the oven. The scribe smooths it with a cloth after it cools. Another minute. Keeps, he says. The rune's equivalent of a nod. Another piece, thicker. Sits longer. The keeper turns it with the hook so both faces share the air equally. Clay, even when hardened, prefers fairness. A gentle aside belongs here. Firing is not aggression. It is invitation. Moisture leaves. Clay learns to keep its shape through weather and handling. Some tablets will live only air dry, shelved for a season and then reclaimed, but the ones meant for archive or dispute meet this heat and become quieter afterward, less interested in changing their minds. From a bench, the apprentice brings a small bowl of water and a soft cloth. When each tablet's surface ceases to glimmer with warmth, he wipes the face once, lifting the kiln's fine powder. Signs stand out crisper, not darker, just sure of their edges. He taps one with a fingernail. The sound is higher than before, like a pot that answers when asked. He adds a tiny wedge on the back, a dot that means fired. A courtesy to whoever shelves them later with tired eyes. Back inside, a merchant arrives with a staff that has known many floors. He wears a simple band around his hair and carries a pouch from which he draws a balance to small plates and a crossbar. It is not to weigh silver today. It is the habit of a man who believes hands should measure. He takes a finished tablet, places it briefly on the left plate, then the right, as if testing consistency against an older piece he knows. The scribe does not comment. The merchant nods, not because he learned anything the scale could truly tell, but because ritual reassures the mind before it reads. They sit at the long board where light from the high opening makes a calm rectangle. The apprentice lays the original tablet and its envelope side by side. With a wooden wedge he cracks the outer skin along the curd's path. The sound is a tiny, clean report, no splinter, only separation. He peels the envelope away like bark from dry reed. The inner tablet appears, signs intact, a pale memory protected since morning. The merchant breathes out in a way that says he had not believed it would be otherwise, but he enjoys being right. The scribe reads, the apprentice follows with a copy made earlier. He traces each sign with the tip of the stylus, not pressing, only touching to confirm no numbers wandered. When a mark seemed shorter on the copy, he checks spacing, then the original again, and adjusts with the fine point until both sets agree like neighbors greeting at a door. The merchant's eyes move, not his mouth. He keeps a twig of date palm as a pointer and taps once each time a line pleases him. Not approval, exactly recognition. A side note, reading here lives partly in the hands, the tablet's balance, the way edges meet thumb and palm. The very temperature helped the mind locate meaning. The apprentice will one day read a list just by moving his finger across its steps. The way a carpenter knows a board's truth by running a palm along the grain. When the pages meet in full agreement, the merchant empties his pouch and brings out a stamp with a simple notch, a personal sign, not carved with animals, but still known in his circle. He presses it into a pea of wet clay and fixes the clay at the tablet's edge beside the teacher's roll. 2 marks now sure the corner. Agreement, made visible, will sleep in that small space as long as someone cares to look. The afternoon settles into checking and shelving. The runner returns, emptied basket, dust softer on his ankles than earlier. He brings back a shard tag from the other end broken in the middle to show the message arrived, and the seal pleased its reader. The scribe places the piece beside its half kept here. 2 halves together say complete. The apprentice writes a single wedge on the docket line to close it, and adds the shard pair to the jar where such proofs live like small bones. The light rotates along the wall, finding first the shelf of messages, then the niche of long lists. The apprentice moves the stool to keep his back from learning a twist. He counts stacks aloud in a soft voice. The numbers hum more than speech, 6 tablets. Then another 6, then 10 and a half again, sexagesimal rhythm soothing as a rope coil settling. The reed Troy asked for attention. He re-wets the cloth and covers the points, then trims one reed whose face has become too blunt from honest work. He smooths its angle on a shard that serves as a whetstone of sorts, then tests by pressing 3 wedgelets in a scrap, setting them like bird tracks that lead nowhere and are allowed to end. From the kiln comes a last small lift of heat, like a sigh. The keeper closes the mouth with a brick and a strip of damp clay. Tomorrow the chamber will be empty of feeling, ready to begin again. He leaves the long hook by the wall, linen grip turned upward so dust will not claim it overnight. The apprentice notes this without thinking. Tools like being put to bed in the same posture. Shelving becomes the final passage. Fired tablets to the back row, air dry to the front where fingers will test them again tomorrow. Envelopes cracked and saved for practice go to a bin that children new apprentices use to learn rolling seals on waste without consequence. The board is wiped. The sand pan is poured back into its jar. 3 crumbs of cooled clay, no good for reworking, go into a small bowl that the teacher, out of habit more than need, keeps as a reminder that even thrift has edges. Afternoon completes itself against the threshold. The merchant gathers his balance, wraps it, and slides it into his pouch. He bows with the exact amount of dip commerce asks and no more, and leaves footfalls that know the lane's stones. The runner sits on the step with a cup of water, then vanishes toward the market with an emptied basket that will soon be full of other errands. The scribe and apprentice look once more around the room without moving anything. Clay bin covered, reed tray wrapped, brazier quiet, shelves reading in their own silent script. Mark's true, the teacher says again, almost to the ear. The apprentice hears it the way a field hears rain mentioned. If your breath has taken the room's pattern cooling, checking, placing, stay with it. The next part will bring late errands, a visit from someone seeking an old line in a stack, and the way evening light turns wedges into tidy shadows that help tired eyes read without effort. Late hours teach rooms another voice. The tablet room quiets in a way that is not empty. It is full of things doing nothing well. In the passage beyond the doorway, shelves run along a cooler wall archives that keep past mornings from wandering. The scribe lifts a key shaped like a bent fishbone and turns a simple peg. The door opens with a light catch, as if wood were clearing its throat. Inside, rows lean like book spines. Fired pieces live against the back, air drying nearer the reach of hands. Dockets tilt toward the aisle, tidy as labels on baskets. Between stacks, clay tags hang from cords strung across pegs, each tag a flat oval with 2 finger holes, each bearing a few wedges that say barley, oil, wool, or accounts of the lower wharf. The room's map made of little suns and roofs. The air is cooler here. It carries a hint of old smoke, and the faint, chalky scent that fired clay forgets to let go. A visitor steps in temple hand by his belt's fringe, polite by the angle of his head. He holds no seal, only a reed list folded around itself. There is a line, he says softly, from 2 summers ago, tribute barley for a granary whose keeper moved. He looks apologetic, as if the line were his fault for continuing to exist. The scribe nods toward a low stool and slips into the aisle without noise. This is the part of the day the apprentice loves. It is a puzzle where all the pieces consent to be found. He runs a finger along the hanging tags until one answers, barley outer quarter triad mark. He lifts the cord off its peg and carries it to the proper shelf. There, stacks were the same triad 3 tiny wedges near their lower edges. He counts inward, left to right 6, then 6 again, then 2, and rests his hand on a tablet with a docket that mentions Summer River High. He knows the hand. It is his teacher's from a time when the apprentice's own wedges were still too shallow. He draws the tablet out into the aisle and sets it on a low brick pier at reading height. Afternoon light from a high vent slips into the corridor and strikes the face at an angle. Wedges take on shadows sharp enough to be their own ink. The sign for barley, its familiar cluster, stands plain. Measures follow, and then names that feel like the city speaking its address. He reads the line with the tip of a reed, not hurrying, the way one follows stitches to understand a garment. The temple hand leans forward just enough to show attention, not anxiety. The scribe repeats the numbers aloud in a voice that stays even. The apprentice checks against the man's folded reed list. They match. You may copy, the scribe says, setting a small practice tablet on a lapboard. The visitor writes with care, signs his name with a mark that belongs to his post, and then smiles at no one in particular. That smile is the shape of relief when a city proves it remembers. A gentle aside belongs here. Archives are a kind mind the community keeps for itself. They do not argue. They do not boast. They lean until someone asks, then straighten long enough to help. Back in the working room, tags and cords receive their late-day order. The apprentice sits where the light is still warm and presses out a handful of fresh blank small ovals to finger holes, one side smooth with a thumb. He sets them on a reed tray to dry until morning. Beside him, lengths of cord-twisted fiber with a slight shine are cut to an arm and a half, tied in coils that lie flat. He tucks one through each drying tag to remind tomorrow's hands that cords and labels belong together like reed and clay. On the long board, a shallow dish holds tiny balls of soft clay no bigger than lentils. These will become sealed dots on knots and tablet edges. He rolls each between finger and thumb until smooth, then drops them into a small covered jar. The lid wears its own wedge, a single sign that means dots. The joke the room keeps to itself. The seal box receives attention too. He unwraps the cylinder with lions and barley, rubs it with a bit of soft cloth to lift ash from its grooves, and rolls it once across a scrap. The miniature procession appears as it should pause, grain heads, ground lying clear. He smiles without showing teeth. He lifts two other seals from the box, one with a row of fish, one with a plow, and checks that their loops are sound, cords unfrayed. Seals prefer to sleep lightly. They are woken often. At the clay bin, he lifts the lid and sprinkles a little water along the inside rim, not on the center mass. He folds the cloth cap, dampens it, and spreads it again so the bin will keep its temper through the dark. A small wedge, pressed into the lid itself, marks the days and only a habit. But habits build rooms that wake ready. Light slants lower. Wedges on the day's finished tablets turn to tiny gullies with ink dark edges, so clear that tired eyes need not lean. This is the soft grace of evening. Shadow takes up the task of legibility and does it kindly. The scribe takes a slow circuit, pausing where he always pauses, by the reed tray, the brazier, the bin, the shelf. He touches nothing, then touches two things, then touches nothing again. It is the custom of makers to review in silence. Visitors conclude themselves. The temple hand binds his copy with a thread, thanks the room with a slight bow, more to shelves than to people, and leaves with the soft scrape of sandals on fired tile. A porter stops long enough to ask whether a basket of clay scrap may be left by the door. It may. He places it there, covered with cloth, and goes away light-footed. The apprentice gathers sweepings with the palm-red broom, long strokes drawn toward the threshold. Clay dust heaps itself agreeably. He tips it into the jar marked earlier, wets a thumb to pick up the last few grains, and smiles at the way even crumbs agree to become sentences again someday. He wipes the board with a damp cloth, then a dry one, leaving the wood's grain modestly proud. He lays the styluses in a neat row, points aligned, wraps them in the square of linen, and ties the bundle with a loop that knows how to be opened quickly. At the doorway, a sliver of the market's end of day finds them voices at the edge of the lane, a cart's small complaint, bread selling its final stacks. The room lets that noise pass without learning it. The scribe sets a tile shard on the sill, written with the symbol for done, as if the window could read. It is not poetry. It is a practice that keeps hands honest. One more tag to press, the apprentice thinks, and does. One more cord to coil, and it lies flat with its fellows. One more glance at the brazier coals turn to small red beads that hardly glow. He banks them with ash, not to keep for morning, only to ask them to finish and place, quietly. A last aside rests here like a palm on cool clay. Evening work is arrangement, not effort. It is what keeps tomorrow from entering the room with questions that should have been answered today. The apprentice feels this truth as a physical ease in his shoulders. He lifts the bin lid a final time to listen. Clay says nothing, which is the right answer. The lid settles. The peg on the archive door turns. The key returns to its hook shaped like a fishbone. Tools lie as if asleep in reasonable postures. If your breath has worn the archive's pace, find, check, place, let it keep that measure. In the final part, lamps will lower. A last practice tablet will receive a few lines for the apprentice's hand, and the room will draw its door closed the way a sentence takes its period, without fuss, wholly enough. The last of the daylight folds itself along the upper bricks and leaves without comment. The apprentice brings a small board to the middle of the room and sets a practice tablet on it fresh, even the size of his palm and a half. He smooths its face with the flat reed until it remembers water and forgets fingerprints. The stylus he chooses is neither the finest nor the broadest. It is the one his hand finds when it is not thinking. The scribe sits near, not above, lamp between them, wit turns small. He says no proverb, no lofty sentence, only the steady bones of the craft. A column of number signs in the city's counting, then a second column for their multiples. The apprentice sets the first wedge, then the second, keeping the spacing like breath, enough, then enough again. Wedges stand without leaning against one another. Where a point goes shallow, he lifts, moistens the tip on the cloth, and begins that sign anew beside the old. The imperfect marks will be smoothed later, for now they rest and observe. A gentle aside belongs here. Learning lives most happily in small repetition. The hand receives its lesson before the mind names it. Columns welcome sleep better than speeches. Next line. Measures of grain and eye units stacked into quiet sense. The apprentice writes them slowly, listening to the layout more than the words. He divides the page with a single shallow groove, not as a flourish, but as a door in a wall, before, after. On the lower half, the scribe asks for names, simple ones short, familiar, easy to say. The apprentice writes them, pausing to turn the tablet a quarter with each row so the clay's fibers do not learn a curve. A slip occurs. Two wedges crowd each other. He touches the flat reed to the misstep, smooths, breathes, and presses the signs again with the angle corrected. The scribe's hand, resting on his knee, lifts a thumb in a small motion that does not seek the eye. Approval here is modest on purpose. It keeps the room sensible. He rolls the cylinder seal once across the tablet's back, though practice work needs no seal, simply because the act teaches pressure and pace. Lions and grain heads appear in miniature procession. He looks at them as one looks at a neighbor's garden, pleased without wanting. The lamp's small flame makes the tiny forms taller. The low light fills their cuts with shadow and lends them authority beyond their size. Across the room, the ledger waits. It is a tablet of larger format, thick enough to withstand a week's handling. The scribe sets it on the board and opens its day by pressing a single wedge at the margin that means done when evening kisses it. He asks the apprentice to read back the items from memory, not to test him, but to hear how the work sounds when turned into air. The apprentice names them gently, the small message with cord and dot, the envelope cracked, the fired pieces shelved, the visit to the archive, the copied line with its tidy numbers. As he speaks, The scribe enters a brief line for each, no commentary, only the fact of things. At the end, a dot of wet clay sits on the ledger's corner. The scribe presses his thumb into it, not deeply, only enough to give texture. The apprentice adds a smaller print beside it, a quiet twin. These are not signatures that demand a crowd. They are the simplest of acknowledgments, to hands present, to minds attending. Later, when the ledger is baked with others, the paired impressions will still be visible to thumb whorls that slept through many winters and declined to explain themselves. The brazier has fallen to a hush. The apprentice lifts the practice tablet and holds it at the edge of the warmth, turning it slowly the way bread is turned to find its own evenness. Not baking only a coaxing. He sets it on a tile to remember its shape without becoming brittle. Tomorrow, he will smooth its back and add a docket wedge that means practice keep a week. The reed tray deserves its last care. He rinses the tips in water, lays them point away on the linen, and wraps them so fibers won't rise in the night. The bone all returns to its place beside the square-nosed reed. The knife's copper edge is wiped, dried, and slipped into its sleeve of folded cloth. A final sweep draws the day toward the door. Clay dust offers itself willingly, as if dust knows it will be invited to become sentences again. The jar that keeps these sweepings receives another palmful. He tampers the lid with a dab of water so evaporation will not carry away tomorrow's usefulness. The reed mat is lifted and beaten once against the threshold, the sound a soft drum that tells the room nothing needs correcting. The scribe walks the shelves for the last time. He rests a finger on a fired tablet's shoulder, as one does to a friend while passing. He looks into the archive, sees only the sensible silhouettes of stacks and tags, and closes it with the fishbone key. The key's peg knows its angle. The peg knows the wall it belongs to. The wall knows how to keep cool. They lower the lamp until its flame believes itself a spark, and then a thought. The scribe cups it and asks it to retire. Darkness is not total. A kindly square of dust remains cut into the upper bricks. In that square, a small mouth practices its slow arithmetic. Door now. The apprentice draws the bar from its nook and sets it across at a measured height, always the same notch in the posts. The wood acknowledges with a sound that has been the day's last word for years. The wicket within the door is left on its latch but not locked because someone might remember an uncoiled cord or a forgotten cloth and come back with a gentle knock. Trust has a posture too. A short aside fits here like the last stylus in its roll. The room is not sleeping. It is paused. Clay rests at the edge of water's memory. Reeds rest at the edge of becoming points. People rest at the edge of the work that will become them tomorrow in the same quiet increments. Outside, the lane is a cooler sentence. Bread has become crumb, and wheels have become tracks. The apprentice looks once at the sky strip, learns nothing urgent, and returns his gaze to the door he has just closed. He sets his palm flat against it as if to feel whether the day presses back. It does not. It agrees in silence. They step away together, lightly. The city holds itself with the practiced calm of a place that knows how to last. The room behind them keeps its order without witnesses, which is the most satisfying kind of order. If your own breath has begun to align with these endings, lamp lowered, door bar settling, Clay still let it continue in that measured company. The next story will carry a different quiet, leaves gathered on trays, soft chewing in chorus, steam that persuades threads to find each other. and a spindle that turns because a hand has the patience to ask it to. And as we leave the cool bricks and sleeping wedges of the tablet room, let's step into a Han Dynasty courtyard at first light, where mulberry leaves rustle like polite rain. Low tables wait for trays, and the work of silk begins with a sound so small it can be counted by the heart rather than the ear. Morning arrives as a pale ribbon at the courtyard's edge. The mulberry trees keep their shapes in the half-light, each branch trained to a height the smallest child can reach. A jar with yesterday's water stands beneath the eaves, capped with cloth. The cloth is damp, not wet, because the air prefers suggestions. Inside the workroom, bamboo trays rest on a shelf like stacked moons. A low brazier holds a few embers under a mesh of clay, giving off comfort rather than heat. The household stirs without news. Shoes made of straw whisper across swept tiles. Hands are rinsed in cool water. Sleeves are tied back with cords. Someone taps the brazier, not to wake it, only to learn what it remembers from night. A faint orange tells enough. The door to the leaf yard opens on its wooden hinge, and the day agrees to begin. Mulberry leaves are taken before the sun thinks of height. The older son carries a shallow basket and a short knife. He does not cut twigs, he collects leaves, whole and simple, placing them stem inward as if the basket were a small lake and each leaf wanted to float. A gentle aside belongs here. Silkworms prefer leaves that have kept their temper. Bruised leaves give more scent than food. The son takes his time, then takes a little more. Back in the workroom, the mother lays two reeds across the mouth of a wide jar and balances a bamboo sieve upon them. The fresh leaves are spread there for a brief airing, so night's cool can leave them without hurry. She fans them once with a palm leaf, a motion so practiced it hardly counts as movement. The little ones, not yet entrusted with knives, tiptoe to see whether the leaves have begun to shine less. They have. The smell is clean and green, a handkerchief for a warm day. On the top shelf, the small silkworms are still. They look like commas written by a careful hand. Their trees are lined with paper scored into a light lattice so feet can grip and air can pass. The daughter lifts a corner of the paper to see if frost has gathered. It has, politely, in tiny grains like tea leaves. With a straw brush she coaxes the grains away to a waiting bowl. No one speaks loud. The worms do not hear as we do. But peace is a kind of climate. Feeding begins when the house thinks the timing is right, not when the sun insists. The mother takes up a bundle of leaves, stacks them, and slices them into ribbons with a narrow blade. For the smallest mouths, food arrives small. She scatters the cuttings like rain, evenly across the tray. There is always a pause here. Then the sound begins, not chewing exactly, more like cloth gently rubbed together. The little ones lift their heads, search for edges, and find them. It is the quietest chorus, counted more by the chest than by the ear. A note, written softly in the mind. Early feedings come lightly and often. As the worms grow, the cut widens, the portions increase, and the number of meals changes shape. The household keeps time not by bells but by the size of appetite. Children learn to read that clock by watching the leaves disappear in patient order. Between feedings, trays are spaced a hand apart on their shelf poles. A damp cloth hangs nearby, never touching, lending kindness to the air. If the day argues with dryness, a bowl of water is set near the brazier. Steam rises in small ideas and helps the room find balance. Windows open to fingers wide. No more. Drafts are a language silkworms decline to learn. The father checks the screen that keeps moths and stray wings from drifting in. He examines the bamboo uprights for splinters and rubs them with a bit of oil rice bran, thin and even so hands and trays will not quarrel. A basket of clean paper squares waits under the table. These are changed when needed, not by schedule, but by looking. There is very little counting. There is much noticing. Second feeding, slightly larger ribbons, a shade less fine. The oldest girl brings the sieve from the jar. The leaves feel cooler now, agreeable to mouths that have only just learned to be mouths. She spreads them with her fingers held like a rake so the pieces do not pile. Her wrist learns the motion that feeds evenly without thinking. She will keep it all her life. It will belong to her more than any tool. At the far end, a shallow tub holds the leaves that are not first best nibbled, curled, or torn. These will serve the larger worms when the first molt has passed and appetites lose their shyness. Nothing is wasted. Even the tiny stems cut away at dawn will dry and become kindling for a kettle. Later, the room keeps a small ledger tablet, not of clay here, but thin wood rubbed with ash to hold chalk marks. The mother writes to neat lines, first feeding, first shelf, second feeding, trays 1 through 5. She does not mark the time. The day's body remembers on her behalf. A simple sign beside the lines means molting soon, a reminder that the little ones will lie still and look like they have forgotten interest. It is not sleep as we call it, but it behaves like a pause that no one interrupts. Between tasks, a tray is lifted by its rim and turned a quarter so different corners meet light and warmth. The worms become a low tide moving toward leaf edges again. The sound of eating returns. It is no faster than before and no slower. A child leans and listens. Like rain on a roof, he whispers, and the mother nods. Yes. Exactly that size. A traveling peddler passes the courtyard, calling low about baskets and twine. He pauses to set down a coil of bamboo strips. The father examines the weave, presses a corner between thumb and forefinger, and nods. A new tray has arrived. It is set aside to air, then brushed and lined with paper scored fresh. Later, when the young ones grow crowded, this tray will keep elbows from learning to be impatient. By mid-morning the embers begin to reconsider themselves. The daughter nudges the clay grate and adds a small pinch of charcoal with tongs. Not much. Warmth should be a cushion, not a tutor. She dips the fan slowly, once, twice. To teach the embers to remember their job, a bowl of water is moved a hand's width closer. The air decides it is enough. Third feeding waits until the last thread of the second disappears. Leaves this time are torn by hand, not cut, so stems keep their polite stiffness and teach mouths to find the soft between. The worms lift, sway, locate, and settle. Watching them is like watching someone read a movement made of attention more than motion. A gentle aside fits here. Most homes do this in company. Feeding is shared, cleaning is shared. In the lane beyond, other trays are learning the same music. When leaves run low in one courtyard, another sends a basket over the wall stems first to keep the pile sensible. The return favor might be paper, or help at one of the molt days when trays are lifted and worms encouraged to climb to clean paper lattices with a bit of leaf held just ahead like a friendly promise. Near noon the room is almost still. The chewing has settled into background weather. The ledger receives one more line. Air trays, tilt. It is a note to remind afternoon hands that a little tilting keeps the world even. The mother lays the chalk down and rubs her fingers together, finding leaf scent there as if it were a small friendship. The children wash their hands in the jar's cool water, let them dry in the breeze by the door, and watch a single white moth practicing patience on the screen. It will not be invited in. The day understands why. If your own breathing has matched the room spread, pause. Listen, keep to that pace. In the next part, the first molt will arrive like a held breath. Paper lattices will lift whole trays at once. And the household will practice the art of doing almost nothing at exactly the right time. Morning's small wind passes through the courtyard like a hand smoothing cloth. Inside, the trays look unchanged at first glance. Then the mother tilts her head the way people do when they listen for a fine note. Many of the small bodies are raised an instant above the leaves, not to feed, but to go still. Mouths that were busy at dawn have quieted. Ridges along their backs look faintly dull instead of clear. They are thinking about new skins, he says, as if mentioning a neighbor who likes to arrive without knocking. On mold days, the house becomes lighter by choice. The brazier's heat is trimmed. The bowl of water is moved away a hand. Windows open the width of 2 fingers, no more. Drafts have no part in this story. The mother writes a small mark on the ledger for short strokes at a slat, a household script that means rest the trays. It is not a command, it is permission for the day to do less. Feeding pauses. Instead, the family prepares the room for what will need doing once the stillness has ended. Paper lattices appear from a bundle kept on a high shelf. Each lattice is a sheet scored in a pattern of low hills and shallow valleys, the ridges made with a blunt stylus so the paper holds its shape without tearing. The daughter flexes one gently and lays it over a tray so it rests an inch above the leaf layer. The lattice gives the worms something to climb when they wake hungry. It also keeps hands from touching bodies while the old skins loosen. A side note belongs here. In many sericulture houses, the scent after a molt is invited rather than carried out by hand. Fresh leaves spread upon the lattice persuade the small creatures to rise of their own accord. This way, trees are cleaned without moving a single worm. The room admires solutions that ask for cooperation. While the room is quiet, tasks that do not bother silence take their turn. Knives are stroked across a strip of leather. A goose feather brush is checked for loose barbs and trimmed square. The father rubs a little rice bran oil into a tray rim where bamboo has begun to splinter. He buffs it with soft cloth so edges lose their hurry. Children fold clean papers and crease them with a rule so the lines will sit true beneath feet later. From the trees, an older neighbor arrives with a low-shoulder basket and a greeting the color of morning tea. She has cut leaves from her upper branches before sun found them. Her household's worms are one day ahead and eating sharply again. She leaves a bundle for later feedings here and accepts, in turn, 3 paper lattices and a length of cord. Exchanges like this travel with few words. The ledger receives a little knot drawn in chalk beside the day's line, a reminder of the gift's shape more than its value. Back at the shelves, the mother watches the trays the way one watches an infant sleeping, attentive, uninsistent. The smallest begin to stir first. A head lifts, finds the paper ridge above it, and rests again. Underneath, the old skins wrinkle slightly, loose sleeves around growing arms. Molting does not perform for an audience. It takes the time it requires, and everyone else learns patience by standing nearby. Noon steps in on soft feet. The room's air feels even, neither dry nor close. The daughter fans the brazier twice, and then stops, the kind of restraint learned from the creatures at hand. A few of the worms now wear a new sheen brighter than morning, bodies lengthened as if they had remembered a promise to become larger. White, not snow white, more the color of a peeled almond. She smiles without showing teeth, and the mother nods, seeing the same. Now the lattices do their work. Over each tray, the daughter sprinkles a light scattering of fresh leaves, uncut, small enough for new mouths, whole enough to retain a little spring. She does not pat them down. The scent rises, the room leans toward it. One by one, the newly shed climb through the scored paper to the food above, feet finding the ridges easily. It is not a march, it is a tide. Those who have not finished their shedding remain below without being hurried. The house understands staggered beginnings. After a reasonable while, when the upper layer hums softly with eating and the lower layer shows more frass than leaf, the mother lifts the lattice by its corners and carries it worms, leaves. Small sounds to a waiting clean tray. The old tray, now mostly empty of bodies, receives a steady brushing with the straw brush. Bits of wilted leaf join the frass in a bowl that will go to the compost trench by the wall. The paper liner is changed for a fresh scored sheet. The lattice returns to its new bed. The process is not complicated. It is simply done in the same way every time, which is how rooms stay quiet. A gentle aside, these pauses and ascents will visit the household several times. Each instar, the appetite grows, the leaf cut widens, and the distance between feedings rearranges itself. Notebooks in many homes grow a pattern of marks that look like tides on a shore you will not see. Panic in those pages, only lines that say, in effect, "We answered." When most of the trays have been lifted and cleaned in this fashion, the family sits for a cup of barley tea. The steam carries leaf smell out of the sleeves and away from faces. The father adds a crumbled sliver of preserved plum to the pot. It greets the mouth with a steadying salt, reminding everyone that work and comfort share the same bowl. Later, as the house re-enters ordinary time, grading begins. The larger worms, now confident eaters, are offered broader cut leaves on the upper racks where air moves little, while the smaller ones remain on lower shelves with gentler portions and closer warmth. The new tray from the peddler is pressed into service, a light white with a barely damp cloth, a fresh liner, a paper lattice already scored. The children like this part. They count without numbers, sorting by a look and a feel they could not teach if asked. The mother watches their hands learn speed and slow clothing. The room's climate receives its own small corrections. A saucer of water that had stood near the brazier is taken away the day no longer asked for it. A window slit is widened the width of a thumb, then stopped. Silk dislikes suddenness. The daughter places her palm over the trays to sense the minute drift of air. She does not decide anything based on a single touch. She returns a few breaths later and checks again. Decisions settle like dust by falling gently and sticking. Before evening, the ledger takes a short, tidy sentence of its own. First mold passed on upper shelf of scent and cleaned on lines widened tomorrow. The chalk makes a dry sound pleasant to the ear. A small dot at the end of the line means remember water early because In the morning the oldest boy will cut more leaves than yesterday, and baskets filled at dawn feel heavier after sun climbs. A neighbor boy appears at the doorframe, sent to ask whether the family will need extra leaves 2 days hence when his household prunes the far trees. We will trade paper, the mother says, and the boy nods, pleased by the predictability of the world. He leaves with a picked-over twig to chew, which satisfies the need to carry something away. By the last light, the sound in the room has changed. The new skins eat as if they remember being hungry. Not hurried, just definite. The trays, wider apart now, breathe evenly. On the screen, a moth considers and decides against visiting. The brazier quiets to the color of old brick. The daughter ties back her sleeves, wipes the leaf knife, and sets it into its sleeve of folded cloth. A rinsed bowl receives a final swirl to send away the day's green stain. It is not erased, it is reminded to leave. If your own breath has taken on the room's measured weighting, do little, then a little more, lift gently. Let appetite return on its own. Keep to that calm. In the next part, the trays will spread farther, leaves will arrive by the armful, and the steady rain soft chewing will deepen into a weather that fills the house from dawn to night. By the next morning the courtyard looks slightly smaller, though nothing has moved. Abundance does that, fills the edges without touching them. The mulberries wear new light, their leaves hold a gloss that promises effort when carried indoors. The eldest son goes out with 2 baskets instead of 1. He works from the outer branches toward the trunk, leaving the tips to keep the tree pleased. Stems are snapped with quick, neat motions that do not bruise. He stacks the leaves as a mason stacks brick, aligned with sense, so the pile does not argue on the walk back. Inside, the trays have widened their space to 1.5 hands between each. Worms now resemble soft, pale twigs with purpose. The sound, once like a memory of rain, has deepened. It is not louder so much as nearer. The mother sets a sieve across the jar, lays the new leaves to air, and fans twice to lift any lingering night from them. The knife for cutting has been honed, its edge asks for respect, not fear. Today's portions are broader strips the width of a finger for the mid-sized eaters, whole leaves torn in thirds for the bold appetites above. Feeding follows a practiced pattern that has changed in ways only the hands notice. The daughter scatters to the rhythm she knows: shake, settle, move along, shake, settle, move along, so that no corner receives too much affection. The father steps between shelves with a straw brush and clears yesterday's frass from the lower trays. He does not scrape, he guides. The bowl beside him fills with the tidy grains, ready for the compost trench. A small aside belongs here. The trench makes the next year's kitchen steady. Even silkwork loans favor to vegetables. A neighbor's boy appears with an arm of branches trimmed from the far trees. He earns a bowl of rice water and a seat on the threshold while leaves are stripped and sorted. The younger children help, making to neat piles, full leaf and leaf with tender stem. The first travels upward to the largest eaters, the second stays on the middle shelves where softer mouths work with patience. Sorting like this is a language learned by fingertips. By mid-morning the room has reached that fullness where the air seems gentled by use. The brazier stands quiet, a shallow dish of water takes its place near the door to keep the day even. Windows open the width of a broad beam, teaching the breeze to visit without making demands. The mother measures nothing with tools, she measures with the underside of her wrist held near the trays, and with the way that paper liners feel when lifted. If the paper resists, the room is too damp. If it lifts too easily, a saucer moved closer. Adjustments here are as reversible as they are small. Another feeding. Leaves arrive not as a rain but as soft weather. The oldest worms, now unbothered by ceremony, begin to eat as soon as leaf touches tray. They lift their forebodies just enough to say yes, and then get on with it. Their skins look like clean parchment. If one lags, no one insists. The next handful will convince it. Appetite has a schedule and keeps it politely. Between servings, grading returns. The family works from shelf to shelf with the confidence of people who know every flaw their baskets can hold. The daughter moves the strongest feeders upward, where air keeps them comfortably honest. The younger ones remain lower, where warmth is a cushion. A new tray joins the stack, a recent purchase from the peddler. It receives a light rub of rice bran oil, a fresh paper lattice, and a chalk mark on the ledger that looks like a small roof. The mark means simply more room. A side note, it is tempting to hurry when hunger seems endless. The old women in the lane will shake their heads kindly at that. Let appetite lead, they say. You arrive at cocoons more surely by following than by pulling. Homes that trust this arrive at the same season with fewer surprises. By noon, chewing carries the house along. It is steadying company, the kind that makes small tasks easier. The father repairs a bamboo rim with a silk thread coughed from an old cocoon saved last year for mending. He wraps, knots, tucks, and runs a fingertip around the edge to learn whether the tray will accept the next month with grace. The thread holds it, quiet lineage silk repairing the thing that shelters silk. He smiles at the thought and lets it pass. After a simple meal, rice, pickled greens, a slice of yesterday's tofu warm near the brazier, the family returns to the trays with clean hands. Leaves again, broader still for the upper shelves. The daughter tears with a twist, which keeps moisture where mouths find it, and leaves a tidy fracture instead of a fuzzy edge. On one tray she lays whole leaves, vein side up, and watches the largest worms choose the thick roads of green first, then wander to softer country. The ledger receives brief marks. Not time states. Broad cut okay, a wedge-like tick learned from an older aunt. Middle trays hold steady. A dot placed higher than the line means watch for next stillness, a reminder that another molt will ask the house to step lightly again. These marks are not cryptic, they are personal. If another household read them, they would seem like poetry. Here, they are the day's weather pinned to a board. Late afternoon brings the leaf yard's slow shake. The sun returns with one last basket, the leaves kept under a wet cloth so the heat does not make opinions in them. He pours them onto the sieve, and the mother fans one's habit more than need. She selects a handful and demonstrates the evening cut, a torn half, then long strips, then a broken corner for the tray that holds the few laggards. Evenness is fairness, fairness is calm. Cleaning returns in a wider loop. The father lifts a lattice, and the daughter carries it like a tray of small cups, the worms spaced, resting, eating. The empty bed below is brushed, lined afresh, and receives back its little city. No voice rises, no gesture asks to be seen. This is the kind of work that teaches a house to sleep well. A gentle aside finds a seat here. Illness, when it visits, announces itself without drama, bodies that refuse to shine, a smell that reads as wrong to noses taught by leaves. When such signs appear, families move with compassion and remove affected trays. But tonight is a healthy night of abundance, order, and patience share the same table. The lane knows this through the way silence sits, content not heavy. Evening sends a cooler hand through the window slits. The mother closes one with a finger and leaves the other exactly as it is. The brazier reclaims a small ember, encouraged by two breaths and a fan. A saucer of water goes to the far corner to keep balance. The largest trays are fed one last time, whole leaves placed like small roofs in a tidy pattern so night mouths can find their way without wandering. The sound rises and settles as fire does when asked gently. The children's sleeves untied now collect the day's paper scraps and roll them into a cord that will start tomorrow's kettle. They laugh only with eyes, the room favors soft faces over voices at this hour. A moth thinks about the screen and chooses the night instead. The daughter wipes the knife on its cloth and slides it into its narrow sleeve. The father checks the trays one more time with the same eye he uses for weather. He nods to no one, which is the most convincing kind of approval. The ledger receives the smallest mark of the day, a dot that means enough. If your breathing has swelled and softened like the house more, then pause, let it keep that metronome. In the next part, the room will tilt towards stillness again as the last molt passes. Twigs are set for climbing, and the first silken threads find each other in a corner where cocoon begins without. Announcement. Morning enters as a cooler idea than yesterday. The leaf yard smells green but not ear. Even the mulberries seem to understand that less motion will be asked of everyone today. Inside, the trees are wide apart and square to the light. The worms have grown plump, pale, definite, and their skins shine in a way that hints they will soon prefer stillness to food. The mother touches a paper lattice with the back of her fingers. Almost, she says, smiling as if greeting someone at a distance who will arrive by evening. The room changes its furniture for this chapter. Bundles of twigs, thin willow, trimmed and washed, come down from their shelf in the eaves. The father has saved these since winter, tied in neat sheaves, their cut ends smooth so no sharp surprise will greet feet. He rinses them in a basin and stands them to drain so the last drops fall away on their own. A gentle aside belongs here. Frames for climbing, called by many names in many places, invite the creatures upward so they can spin undisturbed. Homes that forget frames find cocoons under leaf drifts and inside corners. Homes that remember them turn work into arrangement rather than search. The daughter prepares hills, light cones of straw and twig fastened into lattice tents. She sets them in empty trays near the upper racks where air passes without pushing. The youngest child places small twig rings the size of bracelets along the rims so explorers will find a first step quickly. Even the little ones help. They sort the tittier twigs from the wayward ones and lay them like spokes. Sorting is a language they now speak well. Leaves arrive, but less. The eldest son returns with a single basket, not two. He chooses leaves with more backbone, mature and blemished, veins queer. These will be offered as an invitation rather than a feast. In the workroom, the mother airs them on the sieve and fans once, then lets the room decide what it wants. The brazier's embers are kept low. A shallow bowl of water stands near the far corner to grant a kindly humidity. Windows open a finger less than yesterday, the way one tucks a shawl closer when conversation softens. Feeding becomes gesture, a leaf here, a half there, and then long pauses. Many heads lift but do not move forward. Backs show a faint dusting, as if someone had breathed a whisper of flour across them. The daughter watches for a sign she's been taught to love, a faint line along the neck that reads as readiness. Soon, she echoes her mother. By mid-morning, the first quiet is upon them. Worms hold their bodies like held notes. Mouths that would accept a leaf an hour ago now pretend not to see it. The sound in the room thins to the edge of hearing. The ledger receives a mark that looks like a closed eye. It means, in this household, let them choose. Frames come forward. The father sets twig cones into place above the upper trays, and along to shelves cleared for this purpose. The daughter sprinkles the barest thread of leaf at the frame's lower edges, the smallest persuasion only. One by one, the first climbers lift and feel for texture. Feet meet twigs and seem pleased. Bodies settle against spokes, then bend into a gentle question mark. The first threads arrive without announcement, thin as breath, catching at small bark notches and at other new threads that cross their path. The room learns a new music, quieter than chewing, a faint, constant brushing, like silk speaking only to itself. A gentle aside belongs here. The first strands are exploratory seeking, testing mapping. They collect and strengthen with each pass. The creature's head moves in steady loops, figure eights, and small arcs, writing the shape it needs to disappear inside. No one corks it. No one could. This is the part of the work that knows more than the house. As the day lengthens, more trays accept frames, more frames gain small occupants. Those who are not ready remain on their papers, unbothered. For them, a few tidy leaves arrive at long intervals. The mother's hands, always fair, ensure that hunger does not chase stillness away. The youngest child, charged with watching the very smallest, keeps a counting game. How many heads still follow a leaf shadow? How many have learned to look inward? She whispers numbers, then lets them go. Cocoon walls thicken. What began as a suggestion becomes a structure. Threads cross and cross again, shine rising from paleness into quiet glow. The first full cocoons are thumb-sized and perfect in their modesty, ovals with no corners, smooth as river stones wrapped in mourning. The daughter holds a tray up to the light and angles it so the small moons show themselves between spokes. There, she says, not to prove anything, only to share the kind of seeing that makes the day satisfied. Between acts of looking, the room tends itself. Frass is brushed away from lower trays with straw gentleness. A paper liner is changed where a few leg eaters needed grace. The brazier receives a spoon of charcoal and a breath from the bellows, one careful pulse. The saucer of water crosses the room at the pace of thought. The father tests an upper corner where the air sometimes overreaches. He brings the window in until the moth at the screen agrees to stay outside without resentment. A neighbor stops in the doorway, hat in hands, offering news shaped like courtesy. Our frames are full. He leaves a coil of old silk floss from last season, the shreds and edges not fit for reeling, but perfect for tying and mending. In exchange, he takes 2 of the family's willow cones. Promising their return, exchange continues its quiet stroll down the lane. Afternoon presses without heat. Those already spinning deepen their labor. Those nearly ready begin their first loops. The sound now is neither chewing nor silence. It is the softest embroidery, a continuous, patient stroke. The mother prepares a pot in the farthest corner, not to reel, not yet, but to test future readiness. She half fills it with water, sets it near warmth, and places a flat net beside it. A gentle aside, reeling waits for the right day. Cocoons must complete themselves. Their makers must finish their algebra of loops. Only then will some be chosen for steaming and thread. Others will be saved for moths to finish the year's circle. Households decide their ratios with a mix of need and custom. Evening carries a small gold into the room. The frames glimmer no sparkle, only the honest sheen of threads laid correctly over time. The daughter makes one slow round with a feather brush to free any strand that caught on a neighbor's elbow. The brush touches twig, not the cocoon. The creatures inside do not admit they know. They continue writing their eggshells of silk from the inside out. Below on the shelves, the few who still eat accept whole leaves once more. The youngest child, steady now in her task, offers 1 leaf per small company and counts to 20 before offering another. When no head lifts, she sets the bundle aside and joins her sister in watching the frames. The ledger receives its calm poetry. The mother writes, "First moon's 10, seeking lines strong, food quiet, watch west shelf for late." She adds 2 dots side by side. In this family, those dots mean good feeling, ledger scripts or local languages. They do not need to be translated to be true. Before lamps, the family tidies the edges. The leaf knife is wiped and dried. The sieve is leaned where air will treat it well. Twigs not used return to their shelf bundled by size. The floor learns the broom's long sentence. Dust and crumbs travel to the trench bowl to become tomorrow's steady vegetable. The brazier is asked to remember itself lightly through the night. One last loop. The father walks under the frames and listens with his head tilted the way the mother did in the morning. He nods. The daughter holds still long enough to decide the room is set. The youngest child places a pebble on the sill as a promise to bring it back to the trench tomorrow. She doesn't know why this matters, but rituals often begin as games and end as wisdom. If your breathing is thinned and brightened with the room, less food, more frame, less talk, more thread, let it keep that length. In the final part, the frames will fill. The earliest cocoons will harden to readiness. And a first small trial of reeling will show how loops become a line that runs through water into a quiet spool. Morning puts a gentle hand on the frames and finds them quiet. The small moons have finished their writing, the threads lie close and true. The mother checks by touch rather than by sight. One cocoon lifted, weighed in the palm, set by the ear, turned slowly. It answers like a seashell does, with the sound of its own patience. Ready, she says, not to rush, only to recognize. 2 baskets stand prepared, one for cocoons that will become thread and one for cocoons that will become moss. The youngest child is trusted with the second basket. She chooses evenly from each tray, one here, one there, so the families inside the cocoons will be scattered well and the laying season will not arrive all at once. Her basket goes to the cooler corner where a screen hangs and soft light visits. The first basket rests near the brazier where a pot of water warms to the kind of steam that prefers the face, not the hand. A gentle aside belongs here. To draw silk as a line, the gun that holds each filament needs reminding to soften. Warm water offers that reminder. Some houses steam, some soak. All pay attention to not more than is needed. This home speaks softly even to pots. The daughter lowers a small net into the pot, just a shallow reed tray that likes to sit on the water rather than in it. A handful of cocoons ride there and bathe in the rising warmth until their faces shine like polished eggshell. Nearby stands a brush-stiff broomgrass bound into a little wreath. She turns it in her fingers once, then dips its edge across the surface. It gathers what the house calls flowers, the first loose ends fine as breath, that rise from the softened cocoons and cling to the brush like polite guests, finding a sleeve. The father sits at a low reel to arms, and a crosspiece with a turning handle. Between pot and reel, a smooth guide stands a curved rod of bone or porcelain that teaches the line to travel straight without opinion. The daughter teases the gathered ends with thumb and forefinger until a small company of filaments agrees to become one. The first draw is not smooth. It rarely is. She lifts, lets the line slip over the guide, and hands the thin river to her father. He turns the handle, not quickly, not slow, and the line answers with a hush that sounds like nothing else. Water and thread negotiating. A side note. One cocoon offers a single filament that is almost too fine to believe. Many filaments, gathered, make the silk strong enough to remember a loom. The family decides how many to combine by the feel at the guide too thin and the line chatters, too thick and it ignores instructions. Here they settle on a small number and keep it steady. Consistency is a kindness to future hands. The pot asks for attention without words. The daughter lifts the reed tray, shakes it slightly so no flowers rise, and draws them to the brush. When a cocoon's thread nears its end, it signals by changing voice at the guide. The father feels it in the wrist more than the ear. He pinches the line gently, lets the last turns finish on the reel, and then adds a fresh filament from the brush to the company already traveling. The joint hides itself, the reel continues. Interruptions are taught not to show. In the cool corner, the basket for future moth sits under a cloth that is not heavy. The youngest child looks in and replaces the cloth in a way that says she trusts time to keep its part of the work. On the table, a dish waits for floss threads that refused to become line or the outermost layers that protect the neat inner filament. The mother smooths these into a small mound. They are not waste. Later they will cushion pillow seams, tie bundles, or mend a rim. Houses that keep sericulture often keep no trash that quiet hands cannot transform. More cocoons are lifted to the pot, more flowers find the brush, more line settles into itself. The rhythm soon belongs to everyone present. Draw, add, turn, draw, add, turn. The father's handle never wins against the guide. It follows what the guide and the line suggest. The daughter's wrists learn when to invite, when to wait, and when to press a stray drop of water from a thread so it will not remember bubble later when the cloth is washed. Now and then, the reel rests, and the skein receives a small twist. Twisting is not a command. It is a suggestion that asks the fibers to become neighbors rather than strangers. The skein grows soft and certain, loop by loop. When it reaches the measure the family prefers a loop circumference their grandmothers agreed upon, the daughter slips it from the arms, squeezes it gently in a cloth to remove shy water, and hangs it on a bow of bamboo where air goes by like a kind visitor. Between reels, the father grades cocoons by weight and feel. The light ones often came late to spinning, their filaments are shorter. The lovely heavies give lines that travel a long way without losing temper. He sorts these with the steadiness of someone who has never tried to be clever about what touch already knows. The ledger receives small marks, 3 loops, For a dot beside the heavier pile, a small curve that means good color. The mother tends the pot. She skims a stray husk. She adds a spoon of hot water when steam speaks too eagerly. She wipes the guide's curve with a corner of cloth, not to polish but to keep the day from chalking its memory there. Now and then she glances at the coal basket and notes a bloom where a cocoon darkens the hint that a moth will be thinking soon. She smiles at futures for which the room is already tidying its corners. Midday passes in the kind of contentment that makes even hunger unimportant. When a bowl of noodles appears, the reel pauses. Hands eat, then rinse, then return without gripping. The daughter counts with the line itself, not with numbers. The father, amused by his own habit, taps the guide each time a join glides by without notice. The sound is very small. The table seems to enjoy it. By late afternoon, a row of fresh skeins hangs like tame clouds on the bamboo bough. Their shine is not a boast, it is simply a surface that remembers water. The mother lifts one loop and turns it in the light to check for evenness. No interruptions show. She ties the skein with two stays, one near the top, one near the bottom. Stays keep a loop from learning to tangle later when a weaver wins it off. She nods once, sets the skein aside on a cloth whose only job today is gentleness. The room cleans itself with the day still in it. The pot is tipped and rinsed. The reed tray leans to dry. The brush is combed with fingers and left bristles up in its cup. The guide gleans from a wipe that remembered to be soft. Cocoons that have given their long lines are saved. Their husks will become small helpers, stuffing for a pillow, wraps for a jar, padding beneath a lid. The floor gathers the day's hidden threads. The broom persuades them to live somewhere less hopeful of clinging. The ledger records a quiet poem of loops and bowls and trays. Skein 7, even, coal basket safe, floss good. The mother adds the smallest of marks to tiny strokes like doors slightly open. In this house it means tomorrow also. Evening loosens the room. Frames no longer speak. The pot has finished its thinking. The family sits where air is kind and watches the bamboo bough with its pale fruit. They do not discuss markets or coin. The skeins will become what they should become when the hour is right, and the dye pots remember their songs. For now, they are simply proof that a leaf can travel a long way by consenting to be eaten, and that attention, when kept lightly, makes a line that holds. If your breath has taken this last rhythm draw, add, turn, rust, let it keep the pace. The day has tucked in its tools, the baskets have learned their corners. Night can arrive knowing it will be welcomed without having to explain itself. And as the final loop dries on the bamboo bough, let's quietly follow a line of water out of the courtyard toward a formal garden where channels cross like stitched cloth, where an ox turns a wooden wheel without hurry, and where keepers guide a Saqiya's patient song through beds of shade and scent. Before the sun has decided what kind of day to be, the garden already knows its shape. Paths meet at right angles like threads in a cloth. Low walls hold beds of damp earth where roses and jasmines wait under the cool. In the far corner, under a tamarind's loose shade, the Saqiya stands as if it grew there, a wooden frame, a wheel with patient teeth, and a long chain filled with small clay pots that nod politely to one another as they go round. The ox that walks the turning path does not need convincing. It has learned the circle the way rivers learn their bends. A keeper arrives without noise. He sets a coil of rope on a low wall and tests the wheel's axle with the same hand he uses to check a child's brow, back of the fingers, light and honest. The wood answers with a faint creak, not complaint, more a good morning. He lifts a small pot of oil and smooths a thumb's worth along the places that prefer kindness: axle cap, pin joint, tooth that meets tooth. Oil carries a nutty scent that mixes with wet earth and the sweet idea of roses not yet open. The channel mouth, where water will enter the garden's geometry, is brushed clean with a bundle of twigs. A small chisel made from a worn iron blade checks the stone lip, removing a burr that would have topped the flow to hesitate. Beside the channel, a measuring stick lies against the wall, a piece of bamboo with notches that do not count in units so much as in memories. The top notch says path wet, the next says bed satisfied, the lowest says enough for trees. The stick keeps weather from arguing with habit. A gentle aside belongs here. The Saqiya, sometimes called a Persian wheel, lifts water by repeating a modest thought many times. The little pots dip below the water line, fill, rise with the turning, and tip their mouths into a trough at the top. No single pot pretends to be a river. Altogether, they make a stream that chooses its speed by the comfort of the ox. The keeper leads the ox to the circle. The bell at its collar gives a note shaped like a pebble dropped into a well. He strokes the animal's neck where hair remembers the yoke. The yoke itself is a beam wrapped with cloth in the places that touch bone. Nothing in this work wants a bruise. A second keeper arrives with a palm leaf fan and a small bowl of water for the ox, though the morning is still cool enough to want a shawl. The two men nod without talking. Conversations this early are for tools. The first turn is slow, more reminding than motion. The chain of pots agrees to follow, one dips, another climbs, and the wheel's teeth greet one another with soft regularity. At the top, a thin line of water finds the trough, then thickens, then steadies, traveling along the stone lip into the garden's throat. The keeper watches the first yard with the most attention. If the line wanders, he nudges a tiny wedge of wood into place to correct the angle. If it runs too quickly, he moves a stone by the bed to raise the path's mind a little and ask the stream to behave. Adjustments here are smaller than the words used to describe them. In the long channel, fish scale ripples show the water's decision to be even. The keeper sets a palm on the surface and lifts it wet, testing coolness that will cheer roots. He walks beside the flow to where the channel meets a cross-ditch and sets a play gate, a sliding tile cut from an old pot into the slot to send part of the water left, part right. The garden is a conversation among quarters. None needs more than the others. Each receives its share until the measuring stick says enough. While water learns its roots, another keeper walks the gravel paths with a rake that has more teeth than a smile and keeps them all gentle. He draws lines to smooth the footprints of yesterday's visitors. The rake lifts tiny stones and lets them fall back with a sound like a soft rain thinking. On the lawn, a low man with a bundle of reeds trims the edges with a hand knife, not to impress, only to invite feet to know where to go without doubt. The first rose opens perhaps earlier than usual. The keeper pauses and does nothing about it. Doing nothing is a task here. He listens to wheel, to water, to ox steps, to leaves saying they are not thirsty yet. He lays a flat stone at the channel's corner where splash might start to erode the form, places it exactly, then changes his mind and turns it after feeling the flow at his ankles. The change makes no drama. It only makes sense. A boy from the gate brings a small bag with the day's dry bread, 2 cucumbers, and a folded cloth of salt. He also carries a narrow trowel borrowed from the kitchen to replace the garden's own, which fractured at the handle yesterday. The keeper thanks him with a slice of cucumber and a simple knot taut to the bag's string, one that picks loose easily with one pull. In gardens, even knots agree to be reasonable. An aside to hold lightly, rulers walk gardens like these and imagine they are private kingdoms. The keepers know better. The geometry owes its calm to water that ignores pride and to hands that would rather correct a pebble than arduous speech. A good garden is humble math done in shade. The ox's bell keeps a gentle count of steps. Every few turns, the keeper speaks to it, not words, more slope and sound. When the line in the main channel reaches the highest notch, he slows the wheel with a hand signal, and a soft call that means walk as if you were thinking about sleep. Water continues, now enough to feed thin side channels that run like quiet stitching toward beds where mint, basil, and marigolds share polite borders with shrubs that will give scenting. The evening. At the first bed, he places his foot on the soil and reads the answer through his heel. The earth yields, and then remembers its place. Good. The mince leaves wear beaded water along their edges that will fall by themselves in a minute. He pinches one leaf without separating it from the stem, holds its scent under his nose, and lets the sharp cool register. He leaves it untouched. Harvest comes later, when the kitchen sends for bundles, and the basket learns to carry green. Near the fountain slab, a simple square fed by the channel, he smooths the lip with his palm and lifts a few scattering leaves away with the fingers. Water plays over the stone without splashing, then returns to the runnel that carries it onward. A small crank lifts a gate to pass the flow into the next quarter. The keeper uses a stick to guide a tadpole over the sill and smiles at having made an unnecessary rescue. Mid-morning, the second keeper brings the oil again and tends the tooth that always thinks about complaining. He trims a wooden peg with a knife to make a better fit. Shavings curl to the ground and are swept into a corner to dry. Later they will remember flame. The ox rests for 3 minutes, and yoke but without wandering. It knows the circle can forgive a pause. The boy fans its shoulder, and the bell falls still as if practicing a different music. When the wheel takes its motion again, the keeper shifts a clay gate to feed the orchard strip, a narrow row of young citrus that ask for discipline with their thirst. He counts slowly to a number he keeps on the tongue but never speaks to others. Then moves the gate back. The citrus roots like measured gifts more than steady lectures. The garden has visitors now, to scribes who prefer water to ink before their work begins, and an old woman who sells sweet lime and stories near the gate. They keep to the pots and breathe with interest but without claim. The keeper rakes after them. Once, not to erase them, only to remind the path who it is when unattended. If your breath has matched the wheel, turn, lift, tip, rest, let it keep that measure. In the next part, the water will learn the garden's afternoon basins will be washed without emptying them. The ox will be salved with oil and shade, and the keepers will show how a landscape's piece is written by small corrections made often and without display. By late morning the garden's lines have learned their numbers. Water moves like someone counting in a language made of gates and stones. At the head of the main run, the keeper lowers a clay slide the thickness of 2 fingers. The stream softens. The small pots at the wheel still rise and tip, but their gift now travels with more thought than excitement. He glances at the notched bamboo bed satisfied, and marks the notch's damp edge with a thumb. This is the day's arithmetic. Add a little here, carry a little there, never ask the column to be larger than the page. The cross channels host their own negotiations. At one intersection, he rests a flat pebble where a curl of current tries to show off. The ripple agrees to become a line. At another, a leaf raft gathers at a corner. He guides it forward with a reed, not to clean for cleanliness' sake, but because leaves can teach water to forget directions if left to their own counsel. A gentle aside belongs here. Perfection in gardens is a myth that bores the soil. What matters is the steady companionship between flow and intention. The fountain slab in the eastern quarter needs a small kindness. Its lip has taken to whispering more than is graceful. The keeper rubs the stone with a smooth potsherd, rounding the edge until the water changes from murmur to breath. The sheet that slips over the face becomes a cheddar-thin cloth of liquid lying close without tearing. He tests it by resting to fingers in the fall. The water retains its quiet. Good, he says, the kind of word that belongs to tools more than people. At the wheel, the ox receives its own arithmetic. A pause every 30 turns, a sip of water every 60. A handful of chaff rubbed into the fur where the yoke likes to remember itself. The second keeper brings a small gourd of oil and works it into the shoulder with a palm that knows muscle in maps rather than portraits. The bell offers its consent with a single note. Shade is coaxed across the path with a reed mat hung between two poles, moved as the sun decides to think harder about the day. The boy from the gate returns with a repair for the fractured trowel, new haft cut from neem, smooth and plain. The keeper fits it with a wedge and taps once. The blade sits true. The boy waits, eyes bright, for a task he can own. He is given the mint border. Remove the runners that aspire to annex the path. Tuck them back into soil where their ambition will be appreciated. He kneels, pinches, sets, pats. The path breathes again. Midday leans toward the garden, and with it a rule, basins are washed without losing their minds. The keeper chooses the small square trough near the cypress. He shifts the gate to ask less water for a span of heartbeats, then lifts a woven basket into the trough and swirls it the way a mother turns a child in bathwater, supporting, not spilling. Silt rises like a cloud, then leaves by the overflow cut. He wipes the corners with a brush of date fibers and sets the basket aside to dry on a sun-warmed stone. The stream resumes its full sentence the instant the brush leaves the surface. If someone watches from the shade, they would think nothing happened, which is a victory. A gentle aside, the smell of washed stone is smaller than the smell of rain but shaped similarly. It tells roots that attention lives upstream. Roots, though ignorant of words, answer by holding their ground with an ease that makes fruit kind later. Along the orchard strip, the citrus asked for their measured gifts. The keeper cracks the clay gate one thumb width, counts softly, and closes it with the back of his fingers so the pressure does not startle the tile. A coppersmith passing the outer wall sends a call like a bell over cloth. The garden absorbs it and gives back only the sound of water and careful feet. The raking man hums a measureless tune that lends length to the path, and then forgets it, the way songs should behave at work. A pair of scribes choose the western bench and wet their throats from a jar set in a shady alcove. The jar's neck wears a damp cloth, its sides sweat kindness into the air. One scribe sets a wax tablet on his knee and lists names of herbs he struggles to remember. He spells basil 3 ways and then decides to draw the leaf instead. The keeper pauses, nods, and tips the jar a finger to test it's cool. Enough. He leaves it and adjusts a stone near the bench leg so it sits level, thinking likes even seats. The wheel keeps teaching time. Pots dip, fill, rise, and tip. The axles sigh in a language made of circles. The second keeper wipes a tooth where Grit believed it could live and polishes it with a twist of cloth. He checks the chain where two links meet and tightens the pin with a leather-wrapped grip. No hard force, only insistence. He steps back and watches the next 5 mouthfuls empty into the trough. The garden drinks with sheets and threads rather than gulps. In the far quarter, marigolds offer bright buttons among the herbs. A child comes with a shallow tray to pinch blooms for a shrine. The keeper shows where to pinch just above a pair of leaves so the plant will answer with more. The child listens with fingers and makes a neat collection. He carries the tree like a promise and leaves stones undisturbed, which is a kind of education not often written down. Rest comes for all the workers at once because the wheel likes pauses that coincide. The ox is led to a pail under the tamarind and given time to choose its own mouthfuls. The men sit on the low wall with cucumbers and dry bread. Salt opens their tongues, water closes them again. They look at the channel as if it were a quiet page they have been reading all morning. The first keeper draws a line in dust with a twig, a plan to angle the western run half a hand toward a thirsty fig, then rubs it away. Plans that cannot survive the first handful of water are best left to the dust. After the rest, work returns smaller. A gate is pinched, a pebble moved, a ridge resettled where a heel found softness. The rake smooths paths until they look like decisions. The boy with the mint border graduates to the marigold bed's edge, encouraged to use the trowel to tuck soil close where irrigation thinned it. He presses gently with the flat and makes a lip that will keep the next flow from wandering out and surprising the gravel. Cloud wisps begin their afternoon performance, lending a slight forgiveness to the sun. The keeper answers by lifting the reed mat shade a peg higher on its poles, giving the ox a cooler quarter. He rubs the animal's brow where hair grows in a small whirl, and finds there the heat that work accumulates. A handful of rinse water taken from the jar, never from the channel, is smoothed along the yoke's cloth so it does not remember hardness. The bell speaks again, content. The fountain slabs now breathe rather than spill. Froth, when it appears, is soothed by a finger that teaches it to lie down. A dragonfly inspects the sheet, trusts its tension, and skates along it like a thought finding the right word. The keeper allows himself the smallest smile. Creatures that use the garden without confusing it are always welcome. A final aside for this hour. Many gardens show power by height. This one shows care by level. The world here is made of horizontals that decide to be generous. The wheel raises, the channels divide. The beds accept, the paths repeat, shade learns to move. When the bamboo notch reaches trees enough, the keeper closes to gates and lets the main run thicken toward the orchard's far end. He walks the length once more, palm turned downward to feel the garden's cool breathing on his skin. He pauses under the cypress and stands still long enough to hear what is not complaining. That is the sound keeper's prize, nothing needing a name. If your breath has taken the garden's measure, just test, rest, repeat, keep that pace. In the next part, afternoon tilts toward evening, pruning shears speak in small clicks. The wheel yields the last turns to the stillness of shade, and the garden is left with pots that look recently coned and beds that hold their own shape. Until morning asks again. Afternoon leans into the garden with a hand that does not hurry. Light climbs the trunks and settles in the undersides of leaves. The keeper answers by taking a cloth-wrapped bundle from the tool niche, pruning shears, a small whetstone twine, and a loop of soft bark. He wets the stone, draws each blade across it 6 times, and tests the edge on a reed leaf, not to cut it through, only to feel the leaf's clean surrender. The shears speak in clicks the size of raindrops as he begins spent rows, crossing branch, a timid shoot that blocks a channel's view. Each cut is a subtraction that adds calm. He slips a narrow tire on a jasmine cane and persuades it toward the trellis. The twine is tight enough to guide, loose enough to forgive growth. A gentle aside belongs here. In gardens that drink by measured lines, plants that respect geometry are happier than those that insist on invention. The keeper is not a general, he is a schoolmaster with a kind chalk. Along the mint border, the boy who learned the trowel in the morning now learns the shears, just the tips, just the soft runners. Always cut above a pair of leaves so the plant remembers to answer with 2 voices where one stood. He counts 5 careful snips and looks up for approval he does not need. The keeper nods anyway and points with the shears toward a marigold whose bright button leans into the path. Snip-dot, the path exhales. Near the wheel, the second keeper checks the chain of pots. He lifts one with a twist and turns it in his palm. Its rim shows a tiny chip. He files it smooth with a shard of baked clay, then dips the pot in the channel and sets it back into the chain. The repair takes less time than describing it. The ox watches with the content eyes of an animal that knows its keepers prefer small answers early to large answers late. Water continues its quiet arithmetic. The notched bamboo carries a dampness that has crept to the mark for trees satisfied. A finger smudges the wet border as if underlining a phrase in a book. The keeper lowers a clay slide another thumb's breadth and watches the stream accept the suggestion without sulking. At a cross-stitch, he lays a line of pebbles to teach the flow a slower grammar on a young fig's roots. The pebbles listen. Water repeats. Visitors drift away, leaving the paths with prints that look like memory rather than traffic. The raking man comes after with slow arcs that erase nothing and restore everything. Gravel sings its dry song under the rake's teeth. A dragonfly returns to the fountain's veil end. Decides to sit on the lip, an emerald punctuation at the sentence's edge. From the gate, the old woman with sweet lines offers a last call that sounds like a blessing. The boy trades her a sprig of basil and receives in return a lime with a thin skin and quiet perfume. He rolls it under his palm on the bench to loosen its juice, just for the pleasure of the motion, and then pockets it for his mother. The ox receives care that belongs to late hours. The second keeper loosens the yoke and rubs the shoulders with oil scented faintly of sesame and neem. He works in circles that match the animal's muscles. He checks hooves with a glance practiced enough to be touched and lifts one to clean a stone from the cleft with a sliver of wood. The bell, freed of the yoke's jostle, rests against hair and gives no sound. Even bells prefer to listen sometimes. A shallow basket takes its turn at the channel's edge. The keeper sinks it where a little silk gathers, lifts, and lets water rinse the fine grains away through the weave. The remaining larger grit he scatters at the foot of the cypress to give the soil a small lesson in texture. A gentle aside, silt when forgotten becomes opinionated. When attended, it becomes cooperation. Gardens are full of such conversions. At the orchard strip, he revisits each young citrus with the patience of a man repeating a song he likes. He presses the soil near the trunks with the flat of the trowel, not hard, only enough to restore contact where water's thin insistence may have made gaps. He places a palm-sized slate at the base of one tree to shade the soil there from hurried evaporation. The slate warms in the sun and returns that warmth later when evening remembers coolness. The tree will not notice why it is comfortable, only that it is. The wheel has fewer turns to contribute now. The keeper slows the ox with a low word that belongs more to wind than to speech. Pots still dip and lift, but the chain's rhythm relaxes. He widens a side gate to rinse a narrow run that borders the herb quarter, then closes it when the gravel at the edge darkens to the right color. Enough, he says to the water, to the ox, to the day, and to himself in equal measure. A small repair in the east, the lip of a tiny basin has learned to chip where sandals often pause. He opens his cloth roll, chooses a slip of lime mortar saved in a shell, wets the edge with a thumb, and comforts the chip with a wafer of new surface. The patch looks like a moon soon after a cloud passes. It will dry while the fountain breathes. The boy returns the rake to its niche and, unasked, tests the jar in the alcove with its damp cloth. He re-wets the cloth at the basin, never at the channel, and wrings it until drops fall as though counting. He is learning the part of keeping that happens even when no one notices. He places the jar back with a turn so the spout faces the path. The small courtesy pleases him more than his line. A gentle aside, the difference between a public garden and a kept garden is not scale or marble. It is the number of small and remarked choices that lean toward kindness. Shadows lengthen across the lawn in parallel lines with the raked gravel, a geometry that makes the eye breathe easier. The keeper walks the long run from the wheel to the far gate with his palm turned down, feeling cool rise as a woven draft from the water. He closes the outer sluice to a ribbon and settles a clay tile over half the mouth so night will find the channel traveling, but softly. Side gates rest in their slots, open the width of a reed here, closed with a leaf there. The garden will not wake thirsty, it will not dream of floods. The ox is led to the tamarind shade and brushed with a broom of soft grass. Dust lifts and then decides to fall somewhere that is not a shoulder. A handful of chaff mixed with a pinch of salt becomes a small feast. The animal's eye slows its, blinking to the rate of trees. The bell is hung on a peg. Bells also sleep. Tools find their places. The shears are wiped and oiled, wrapped in cloth, and slid into the mitch. The whetstone dries on a ledge and leans against itself like a folded hand. The rake stands with teeth toward the wall, the way a polite comb waits. The clay slides are stacked in pairs by the head gate. The measuring bamboo rests where sun will not confuse its marks before morning. The boy coils the rope in loops of the same size and sets it down so the core lies flat as a thought finished without hurry. The keeper takes the notched bamboo once more and lays it across the channel. Its lowest notch, trees enough, accepts a light rinse that darkens it and then lets it go. He rests the stick on the wall and arranges to pebbles beside it, small weights to keep memory from wandering in the night wind. He runs the pad of his finger along the top stone and straightens it the width of a hair. It makes no difference, and yet changes everything. Evening begins to collect the garden into itself. The fountain slabs breathe in longer sheets. The dragonfly finds its reed. The scent of basil sharpens as air cools. And the first whisper of night jasmine writes a line beside it. The keeper stands where for paths meet and looks without evaluating. The garden answers with a page on which nothing needs correction. If your breath has matched the closing R, snip smooth. Ease, set, stay with it. In the next part, the wheel will give its last gentle turns. Lamps will find their ledges. The channel will be taught to whisper until dawn, and the keepers will leave behind paths that look freshly combed and beds that hold their shape, as if they had decided to do so on their own. Twilight arrives the way a lid closes on a quiet jar. Blue lifts from the pots, green folds its brightness, and keeps only shape. The keeper touches the head gate with 2 fingers, and lets a ribbon of water slip into the main run. Not a stream now, only a line that knows evening. He looks once at the notched bamboo and leaves it where it rests. Night is red from skin and sound, not from marks. The ox stands brushed and easy beneath the tamarind. A garland of fly-brushing grass hangs from a branch and moves the air on its shoulder. The bell, hung on its peg, remembers silence without sulking. The second keeper rubs a last thread of oil into the yoke's cloth where wood might have remembered to be hard. The animal blinks at the hour and lowers its head, which is consent in the grammar of cattle. At the wheel, the chain of pots still turns, but as if dreaming. The keeper has looped the pull rope twice around the anchor peg, so each step of the circle answers with less insistence. Pots dip, rise, and tip with the softness of a taught song sung to oneself. The trough at the top receives these small mouthfuls and passes them along as a whisper that keeps the channels awake enough to avoid forgetting their puffs. A gentle aside belongs here. Gardens sleep best with thin threads of water, not flood, not thirst. A whisper teaches roots to breathe steadily and lets soil hold its shape through darkness. In such hours, keepers retire as participants and remain as listeners. The first lamps appear along the poth's clay cups set into niche shelves in the inner walls. Wicks take flame low, a coin of light with a quiet center. The raking man, finished with the day's combing, cups his palm behind each flame and turns the wicks toward less smoke, more steadiness. He places a small shard of inverted pot above one lamp to shelter it from the tiny wind that enjoys that corner. The shard warms and thanks the flame by keeping it company. Near the fountain slab, water thickens into evening cloth. The keeper holds his hand in the fall not to wash, only to listen through fingers. The sheet does not chatter, it breathes, which is enough. He lifts a leaf that has waited too long at the lip and sets it on the path, stem pointing home as if the leaf could walk back to its tree overnight. Side gates are taught night manners. He nudges one tile open the width of a reed, closes another to the width of a hair, and teaches a third to rest on a pebble so the run there will rise and fall in tiny pulses. Pebble watering, this is what the old gardeners call it, lets a bed listen to water and then to itself. The soil says thank you by settling without crust. In the orchard strip, the young citrus hold their shadows like small parasols. The keeper crouches, presses a thumb into earth at the drip line, and learns coolness that neither boasts nor complains. He leaves them to their arithmetic. Slender moth inspects a marigold and decides against it. Night has its own rules. A boy returns with a candle cup he has rescued from the gate pavilion. He waits until the keeper sees him, then sets the cup on the wall near the measuring bamboo. The flame finds its size. The boy earns a nod and a task suited to twilight, counting laps. He moves along the path whispering numbers, as if telling them to the gravel. Counting in gardens is done for companionship, not for record. At the wheel, the second keeper makes the last adjustment to the pull rope. He lifts the loop from the peg and rewinds it with the lay that best forgives night damp. He tests one turn by walking the ox a half circle and then stops. The wheel agrees to carry on by itself, slow and honest, its weight and the shallow gradient conspiring to keep motion without supervision for an hour or two. Not all wheels allow this. This one has been taught by years. A soft aside, in some places keepers tie a chime above a night gate, a bell that speaks when flow forgets itself. Here the garden prefers silence. The keepers trust their feet to find the path again if called. The keepers wash their hands at the jar in the alcove. The cloth around the neck is damp and cool. The mouth pours a thread of water that remembers how to behave. They share a heel of bread and a cherry of salt. The boy with the lamp count returns with a number he does not say out loud. He holds up fingers, then laughs at his own mistake to many flames for hands and folds his palms together as if to hold them all. The keeper nods and points him to the tamarind shade, where a folded mat waits to teach him how to sit still. Night's first thickness glides over the cypress. The fountain's veil draws darker lines. In the herb quarter basil sharpens, then calms. Night jasmine begins its patient argument with the air. The keeper lifts the smallest lamp from its niche, lowers the wick, and sets it back like a punctuation mark at the end of a line that has decided to be complete. He makes a last circuit by touch. Fingers read the top edges of clay slides, the cool shoulders of basins, the smoothness of stone where feet choose to pause. At each cross-stitch, he sets a pebble in a place that will teach the morning where it left off. Pebbles carry memory. Better than notes, water understands pebble grammar immediately. At the head gate, he closes the outer sluice to a ribbon that can be stepped over without wetting a sandal. The inner gate closer to the trough he leaves breathing. The main run crosses the garden like a heartbeat slowed by rest. In the far quarter, a narrow trickle plays against gravel with a sound like someone sleeping well. The ox shifts size, rearranges weight. The second keeper answers with a palm placed briefly on the animal's brow. Heat there has left. He fits a light cloth across the spine where dew might collect, smooths it once, and steps away. Bells in the city beyond the wall count an hour and a number that does not matter here. The garden keeps time with darker and lighter, with cooler and warmer, with thirst and enough. Tools look like their shadows, the shears sleep in their sleeve, the rake rests, the trowel leans, the whetstone dries. The oil pot sits with a cloth tucked into its mouth so night won't learn its scent and invite. Creatures that confuse kindness with food. The measuring bamboo lies still in its place. If a breeze moves it, the pebble waits say stay. A final aside comes as the keepers sit. What ends a day is not the closing of a gate. It is the feeling shared by water, earth, and hands that no one is waiting on anyone else. That feeling sits on the low wall between them, worn even as air cools. They rise only once more to lower to wicks that have decided to be proud and to move a shard that chases a draft away from a timid flame. The wheel turns slow and decides not to speak about it. The channel whispers. the fountain breeze. The pots look newly combed even in half-light. The garden chooses sleep the way a book closes itself when the reader no longer needs a word. If your breath has learned this hour lower, lean, listen, keep it. In the final part, the wheel will give its last two turns, dawn will lift the lid, night pebbles will show morning where to begin. And the garden will open its sentences again without a single correction demanded. Dawn unwinds the lid without clatter. Gravel wears a brief script of tiny dots that read like a careful hand repeating yes, yes, yes across the puffs. The keeper steps from the gate and pauses until the morning enters his lungs. He turns his palm downward above the main run and finds cool rising evenly, an exhale that says the night's whisper kept its promise. Pebbles left at the cross-ditches speak first. One stands on edge where last evening asked a pulse. The keeper lowers it flat and watches the surface answer with a quieter line. Another pebble rests at a gate slip to remind the stream to begin from the left. He lets it stay. Pebble grammar is simple, water is fluent. He visits the lamps. Each clay cup holds a dark wick that leans like a sleeping reed. With a small reed scoop he lifts the spent ends, trims a shy bit, and nests the wicks in their oil again. Not to relight only to keep readiness tidy. Soot on the knit shelves wipes away with a damp cloth. That leaves behind nothing dramatic, just honesty. At the wheel, the nitrope lies in its slow coil, obedient to do. The second keeper arrives with a small yawn he does not let escape his mouth, and a folded length of yoke cloth warmed at his own shoulder. The ox looks up from the tamarind shade, stretches with gravity's attitude, and walks to the circle because the circle has treated it well. The cloth finds its place, the beam settles, the bell learns its note. A gentle aside belongs here. Work that begins by correcting nothing usually ends by correcting nothing. The garden's best mornings are those that wake without a petition. The first turn is less a turn than a greeting. Pots dip, the chain remembers. The trough at the top clears its throat with water that shivers and then decides to be plain. The keeper watches the first mouthful enter the main run, adjusts the clay slide the width of a fingernail, and leaves it. He touches the notched bamboo just a thumb placed at yesterday's trees enough, and sets it back. Today will write its own damp line. Gravel receives the rake with that low, pleasing hiss that sounds like bread sliced carefully. The boy, earlier than habit, follows the rake's path with an empty tray. Dew beads roll and collect into corners. He tips them into a basin by the cypress where tiny stones enjoy a drink that does not come from the channel. The boy does not have to be told that dew is another kind of water with opinions. Yes, but friendly ones. He takes the mint border first. Runners that thought about annexing the path are pinched and tucked back into a small future. Then the marigold edge one bright button fell in the night. He sets it on the wall to dry, a small sun to teach the day how to start. The keeper walks the orchard strip with his quiet testament soil, heel on path ear turned to the sound of water traveling under shade. Young citrus have slept well, their leaves are curved and undecided, which is right for morning. He cracks the gate their thumb's width, counts in a private language, and closes it with the back of his fingers. The earth says thank you by remaining itself. Near the fountain slabs he smooths one lip with a thumb and finds it already ready. A dragonfly arrives for its inspection appointment and approves without committee. The sheet falls in a single thought that does not break. The second keeper, at the wheel, listens for the tooth that likes to complain and hears nothing from it today in absence that counts as a sound. He rubs the axle cap with oil the color of straw tea and tightens a pin with a leather wrapped twist. The ox steps with the patience of a proverb. The bell counts not time but contentment. Breakfast belongs to hands, not mouths. Dry bread to olives. A slice of cucumber whose scent decides to be green out loud. The boy salts the cucumber on the blade of a knife for the pleasure of watching the grains learn to sit. And the keeper hums half a song that has nothing to do with gardens and everything to do with morning eggs. They drink from the jar in the alcove, clay cool, cloth damp, the thread of water right in a single line into the cup, ending without flourish. Visitors come the way thoughts arrive one after another, but not in a hurry. The scribe who drew basil yesterday shows a leaf improved by sleep, and tries jasmine with a hand that now knows what to listen for. He sits on the bench, turns his tablet, and forgets to speak, which is the point. The old woman with sweet limes walks the path like a line drawn with a soft pencil. She leaves the fruit in exchange for a sprig of mint and a promise that her stories will be shorter today. The keeper smiles. Stories arrive at their own length. Maintenance today is the sort that would bore a song but delights a tool. A pot with a rim that remembered to chip yesterday is filed softer with a scrap of fired clay and replaced in the chain. A gate tile that wanted to wobble finds a bit of sand the width of a fingernail. A crack in the trough's plaster is taught to forget itself with a lick of lime and patience. The whetstone dries thoroughly and lies on its side so water cannot pretend to live in it longer than needed. A gentle aside. Water favors the moderate. It agrees to serve geometry so long as geometry remains humble. Hands that learn modesty from flow become better hands in kitchens and in workshops, not only near channels. By mid-morning, the garden sentences have all been spoken once. Pots look newly combed to anyone who didn't watch the comb. Beds hold their lines as if they invented the idea. The fountain breathes rather than performs. The ox's shoulder has only the heat that belongs to a body working the way it prefers to work. The bell sounds like a coin dropped one room away. The keeper opens to side gates the width of a reed, closes a third the width of a hair, and teaches the main run to walk at the pace of a person who has already arrived. The notched bamboo accepts a new wetness at bed satisfied. The two pebbles that held memory through the night move to hold shade on a narrow lip of channel that always overachieves toward noon. The boy returns the rake to its niche, coils the rope in loops that make a small, flat circle on the shelf, and aligns the shears in their cloth as if each blade were a sentence ending where it should. He inspects the jar's cloth and roots it with water from the basin, not from the channel, wringing it until drops count themselves. He wipes the bench once with his sleeve, not for cleanliness, only to teach the bench that it is still seen. A last look from the keeper at the cross-stitch where he set the pebble on edge last night. The pebble lies flat now as asked. He touches it, not to change it, only to say you worked. He glances along the four paths from the garden center and finds each willing to guide feet that do not know where to go until they see where someone cared. He steps to the ox and lays his palm on the brow. Temper there is calm. He says a word that is not a word and means we will keep teaching each other. The wheel's teeth meet like old friends, not wasting time. Pots perform their small courage. The trough consents to be a throat again. The channel goes on, a line repeating what it knows, which is enough. If your breath has learned this garden's memory lift, tip, send a jest, test, leave, let it stay with you. The Saqiya will keep its day without demanding a witness. The keepers will be here tomorrow with their pebbles, ropes, and quiet arithmetic. And as the garden settles into its measured morning, let's slip down a narrow lane to a different kind of quiet an early modern bookbinder's shop where paper rests in tidy stacks. All's weight in a roll of linen, and a sewing frame hums as thread passes through folded signatures, binding a day into something that can be held. The workshop wakes when the window learns how to be useful. Light comes in a thin rectangle, dust steady inside it like polite snow that forgot to fall. The bench along the wall is already swept. A linen roll near the vise keeps its small chorus of tools in order. Bone folders pale as shells, two awls with polished handles, shears that prefer measured thoughts, a knife wrapped in paper, a square, a rule, a packet of needles threaded last evening. On the floor, boards lean against each other without complaining. The pressed screws a beam, and a habit of certainty waits with its cheeks open a finger's width. Paper rests in neat gatherings at the end of the bench. Yesterday's sheets have dried to themselves and no further. When the binder lifts the top quire, the leaves sigh the way bread does when the crust cools. Grain is tested by a thumb and a small bend. The stack answers with the easy give that says the direction is right. A gentle aside belongs here. Paper likes to fold with its grain. Ask it to do otherwise, and it will agree for a day and remember its grievances for yours. He sets a clean cloth on the bench and begins to fold. Each sheet becomes a folio with a stroke of the bone, then a quarto with a second crease. The bone folder, warm from the hand, persuades the fold into a crisp line that is firm, but not proud. He squares the back edge against a wooden knocking-up block, the steady tap-tap that tiddies edges and persuades leaves to sit like neighbors who know how to share a fence. A faint pencil mark, the lightest arrow at the foot of the outer leaf, becomes the quire's own compass, a friend to collation later. On a tray to the right, linen thread waits in loops, slightly waxed with a cake rubbed to a smooth hill by long use. The wax quiets stray fibers and teaches the line to remember straightness. Two narrow hemp cords lie across the sewing frame uprights, stretched like quiet bridges. They will be the book's hidden ribs, not to be seen when all is done, but felt when the spine is pressed like a heartbeat beneath cloth. The paste pot claims a corner of the hearth. Flour and water, stirred last night to a thin agreement, asked for the smallest warmth. The binder stirs with a wooden spatula slow figure eights that invite lumps to become thoughts rather than opinions. Steam begins as a note and stays a note. When the paste thickens to satin, he lifts the pot away and sets its lid on crooked, the way one talks to cooling sugar. A cloth laid across the top keeps dust from believing it has a place in the day's work. Back at the bench, collating begins. Gatherings are opened, dots and signatures read the small marks the printer left at the foot of pages to keep one world from becoming another by accident. The binder lifts, checks, sets down, and builds a book's quiet order. A, then B, then C, not as letters shouting, but like simple stones placed along a path. A slip of waste paper keeps his thumb clean between stacks. He does not rush. Haste would only rearrange the afternoon into puzzle pieces. The sewing frame receives its guest. He places the first gathering across the cords, feels for even distances with his eye, the kind of measuring that lives in fingers after yours, and pricks the fold with the awl at kettle and at each cord. The awl answers by finding the middle, not by force, but by invitation. An aside, kettle stitch names the loop taken at the head and tail, little knots that bind gatherings into a single spine. The name's origin is uncertain to many, the motion is certain to the hand. Needle in, needle out. The line travels along the fold like a modest river kept between banks by habit more than law. It catches around cord, emerges, enters the next hole, and at the kettle it turns and makes a low knot that will not show unless asked. The second gathering comes, sits on the first, and partners its loops with the older ones. A rhythm begins, through around, through again, kettle and kiss, draw snug but not severe. The thread hums against paper with a sound smaller than whispering. The frame creaks once, remembering other mornings, then it agrees to be quiet. Between gatherings, he wipes the awl on the edge of the cloth without looking. The cloth has known this service long enough to open at the same place each time. On the wall, a printed almanac leans under a nail, its month grid throws small shade on the bench. He glances at nothing in particular there, and counts the holes of the next fold by touch. The needle's eye offers no argument. The wax along the thread keeps memory in place. Across the room, the plow waits to cheeks hugging a blade that eats edges into straightness when asked. For now, edges will remain rough. There is kindness in letting a sewn text block settle under light pressure before any trimming. The leaves breathe into each other, the swell at the spine finds its honest size. And the chords learn how to be part of a single back rather than visitors. He sets the first sewn portion between pressing boards, pulls the press screws until the book says there, and leaves it to think while his hands turn to boards. From the stack of pasteboard layers of paper pressed into patience he selects two sheets, and cuts them larger than the text by a comfortable thumb's width. The knife travels along a steel rule slow enough to avoid drama. Grain direction again receives respect. Covers that disagree with the text block will argue later when a shelf is dry and winter is talkative. He marks the boards at the cord's future stations, a hint only to pencil breadths wide. Paste has cooled to useful. A scrap of waste paper under his hand saves the bench as he brushes a thin coat along a strip of linen that will soon become the spine lining. Brush, lift, brush. Lift always from the middle out so air has no corner to hide in. The linen rests on a rod to lose. It shine without losing its promise. He returns to the frame. More gatherings join. The swell grows modestly, like a loaf understanding warmth. At every fifth choir he steps back and looks not at pages, but at how the spine's curve is learning to be itself. Too little swell, and the shoulder later will shrug. Too much, and the boards will sit like unwilling doors. Today's curve is patient, neither proud nor shy. A gentle aside. Printing may shew genius, binding shows temperament. The bookbinder's pride lives in hinges that do not groan, in text that opens flat without complaint, in a spine that neither caves nor boasts. These are quiet victories, known most loudly to hands. By the time the bell in the lane counts the hour in a metal voice, the text block stands complete on its cords, kettle stitched at head and tail, thread tails tucked, knots modest and regular. He lifts it from the frame with two hands cupped, as if carrying a small animal that sleeps well. The cords lie across the back, waiting to be laced into boards. He sets the sewn block between pressing boards again and tightens until the cheeks kiss evenly. He sweeps the bench with the back of his hand and lets the crumbs of paper fall into the bin where paste ends, thread tails, and shavings make a polite population. The awls return to their linen roll. The bone folder rests on cloth as warm as a pocket. He turns the paste pot's lid a little to thank it for cooling kindly. Air in the room has that balanced feel a shop knows when tasks greet each other without elbowing. The spine will be rounded, the shoulder will be set, chords will be drawn into neat channels, boards will accept their work. But not all at once. The day consents to sequence. If your breathing has taken on this bench rhythm fold, prick, stitch, press, let it remain even. In the next part, chords will be laced and hammered true. The spine will learn its curve under the hammer's soft persuasion. And boards will sit at their hinges like doors that understand welcome. The press opens with a small sigh, no more than a cupboard that knows your hand. The sewn text block comes out warm from its own patience. The chords cross its spine like quiet bridges, evenly spaced, just a touch proud. The binder lays the book on the rounding cushion, a half-moon of stuffed leather that offers lift without argument. He taps the spine with a rounding hammer whose face is polished and kind. Tap, draw, tap again, never striking, only persuading gatherings to lean gently left, then right, until the round shows itself like a horizon. A gentle aside belongs here. Rounding is not a demand, it is an invitation for paper to sit the way it prefers when opened. Books rounded without kindness age like boots left wet by the fire. Books rounded with patience remember their curve in winter and in summer. When the curve is true, backing follows. The book returns to the press between backing boards to wooden cheeks set a hair's breadth above the spine. The hammer's strokes now aim not for curve but for shoulders, those small ledges that will later cradle the boards. He draws the hammer's face along the spine from head to tail, smoothing swell into firm lines that mark where wood will meet paper, and think it always knew how. The kettle stitches breathe, the thread places no complaints, and the chords lie where the hammer teaches them to rest. The press loosens. The binder lifts the block and tests the shoulders with a thumb. They answer by reducing wobble to memory. He smiles, in the quiet way hands smile by continuing. Out comes the plow. The cheeks take the book again, this time for trimming the head and tail. The blade meets the forage with slow turns of the screw. Each pass shaves a curl of paper that falls like pale peelings into the tray. He does not seek perfection like glass. He seeks straightness that carries dignity. The forage may wait or accept a light trim. Today it receives a gentle pass, enough to make the leaves travel in company. Boards are necks. He marks the stations where chords will enter, 2 slits per chord, a small trench between, and a channel cut with a shallow gouge that will let each chord sit proud beneath the paste down. Without asking for notice, awl and knife do their usual duet pierce slice. Test. The board fibers separate as if they had been waiting to be used correctly. Chords meet board. He threads each with a bodkin and draws the linen through the first hole, across the channel, out the second, and back again, tucking the tail so it lies quiet. Lacing is snug, not severe. A mallet kiss flattens the crossing just enough. On the inside face, he teases the tails into small fans, pastes them, and taps them gently so they adhere to the board like well-behaved weeds trained to stay. He closes the book to see how the boards sit at the shoulders. They settle like doors finding plumb. A gentle aside, the hinge of a good book is neither a gap nor a squeeze. It is a conversation that can be repeated years later without raising voices. Laced boards help keep that conversation civil. End papers take their turn. He chooses a stout laid sheet for each side paper with a quiet pattern of chain and wire lines that will sit handsomely just inside the cover. Each sheet is folded, the outer fold rounded lightly on the bone so it embraces the shoulder instead of scolding it. He tips the end papers on with a thin line of paste along the fold, nothing more, and returns the book to the press for a short, thoughtful rest so adhesion can become conviction without bleed, while the press holds, cloth and leather are considered. Today wants cloth plain, undemanding, willing to live in daylight on a shelf. He unrolls a bolt of bookcloth, muted umber with threads that look like patience when seen close. Green direction is found with a rub. He cuts a piece large enough to dress both boards and the spine with generous turn-ins, head-tail foredges. He lays it face down on a clean board and brushes paste in even strokes that begin at the center and push outward so no bubble can pretend to be a guest. Spine lining comes first. The rounded back receives a thin coat of paste. The linen he sized earlier now finds its place, smooth with the bone so it conforms to curve, and kettle without fuss. Over the linen, a paper spine piece narrow and cut with its grain running head to tail lays down to add quiet strength. He leaves a shallow gap at the head and tail for the turn-ins to tuck comfortably. Boards meet cloth. He lifts the pasted cloth, breathes once to set his hands and sets the back first, then lowers each board in turn, leaving a millimeter of square at the head and tail where future eyes will admire neatness without knowing why. The cloth is rubbed down with the palm through clean paper barrier to keep paste honest. The corners are trained, snipped with a long, small cut so the turn-ins fold without bulk, turned head and tail first, then foredges, each preset with the bone folder's rounded end. He opens the boards like a book learning to stretch after a nap. The outer hinge the cloth over the joint receives a stroking press with the folder to define the groove, that slim valley running parallel to the spine. Books breathe better when their grooves are crisp. He wipes a clean line along cloth with a damp brush to lift any paste haze before it convinces itself to live there. Now the text block comes home. The end paper folds, already tipped, are ready to marry boards. He pastes the inside of each board within a pencil frame, thinner near the joint, slightly fuller near the foredge, then brings the book down and closes it, placing it between boards wrapped in clean paper. The press lowers until resistance speaks gently. He does not seek force, he seeks contact. A weight settles on top of brick wrapped in linen years ago that has spent most of its life teaching flatness without drama. A gentle aside, many books are at their most vulnerable now, wet cloth asking to dry true, paste choosing its loyalties, paper remembering its grain. Presses that do not hurry and rooms that do not boast about heat become partners in binding. While pressure works, he prepares the headbands. These will be simple linen wrapped with two colored threads, blue and straw stitched on with a small curved needle into the first gatherings at head and tail. He waxes the threads lightly and rolls the tiny core beneath finger and thumb to teach its straightness. The first wraps take quickly, his needle finds the papers fold without tearing. The headband sits quiet, a narrow punctuation that steadies the eye and strengthens the edge most book lovers use for lifting. He stitches its twin at the tail, ties off under the lining, and presses them both with the bone to seat them kindly. He lifts the book from the press to check joints and squareness. Cloth lies smooth, corners think before they speak, the groove looks like it always belonged. He opens a few leaves near the middle. The text spreads flat with no creak, the true test of a hinge that was taught patience instead of pride. He closes the book and strokes the spine with a thumb. It answers with a firmness wrapped in give. The day's air has taken on the mild sweetness of paste drying well. He sets the book upright between two fellows already dressed yesterday so the spine can keep its round without leaning. A slip of scrap paper goes between the free end paper and the board to catch any late wish of paste to travel. The bench receives a quick sweep, the all points facing, the shears rest like closed lips. If your breathing has matched this portion tap, press lace, turn let it linger. In the next part, the cover will receive its title with quiet gold or measured ink. The foredge may take a simple speckle to keep dust humble, and the book will be readied for its first opening, no ceremony. Just a careful walk through its hinges so it learns how to serve without strain. The shop's light has settled into afternoon, neither early nor late, the sort that makes edges honest without asking them to shine. The book stands between its fellows, spine holding its round with the ease of something that now knows what it is. Today it learns its name. On the bench, a tray receives small matters, a square of calf for a label pared thin at the edges like dusker on a window, a pot of thin paste, a folder with a rounded tip kept smooth by ears, a slip of paper where the title has been written in a hand that prefers clarity to flourish. In the back, the pan of a finishing stove warms gently, charcoal embers tucked under grate that knows when to be modest. A set of brass letters rests nearby in a shallow drawer, reverse and waiting, their faces buffed to a quiet. A gentle aside belongs here. Many binders do not letter at all, preferring a printed paper label or the calm of an unmarked back. Others set gold or blind lines because a shelf is a forest best walked with signs. This shop favors a small label, legible, unassuming, willing to age without theatrics. He cuts the leather rectangle a breath taller than the line of type. The paring knife whispers along the underside, thinning the four margins until they feather. A test band over the folder's edge confirms evenness. There will be no ridge. He marks the spine with two pencil pricks to show where the label should rest between the headband and the shoulders, thought of center, slightly above the middle so that I will find it first without knowing it was helped. If the day will accept gold, this is the hour. He lays a strip of gold leaf on a cushion, a square of suede kept for nothing else. The leaf breathes at the edges, a small weather of its own. He touches a tip with a knife, draws, and the sheet agrees to be smaller. On a scrap, he warms the chosen letters near the stove, not hot, only living, and tests them on waist calf with a whisper of glare so their faces will not overspeak. When the impression reads, not shouts, he sets them aside in the order of the title, backward to the eye but right for the press. The label receives the faintest wash of glare and a minute to think. He lifts it with point tweezers, places it on the spine within the pencil pricks, and strokes from the center out with the folder. The leather takes the curve like cloth learning a shoulder. Paste squeezes invisibly into the cloth's weave and loses its shine. He burnishes once, then twice, then stops enough. Now letters. He lays the book flat with the spine toward him and, with a breath he doesn't keep, presses the first of brass sorts into the label, down and away, not straight down, to keep the impression traveling with the grain. The gold gives itself, the leather accepts, and the stroke he used on the test appears here with the quiet certainty of a word spelled correctly. He repeats the care across the line. If a letter asks for a second kiss, he relents. If one sits a hair high, he forgives. The shelf will read kindness better than triumph. A paper label would have taken a different path, ink drawn by a ruling pen, or a printed slip pasted, and burnished under thin tissue, but today the brass has earned its cooling rack. He lifts the book and tilts it. The letters do not gleam, they glow in their own polite register. Foredge speckling, if done, happens with breath held and intention low. He shields the boards with waste sheets and ties them with string so only the foredge stares back. A toothbrush familiar with pigment, a historied mixture, neither keen nor muddy, meets a stick tapped in rhythm. Fine freckles fall across the trimmed edge like oh whether the book knows how to wear. Speckling discourages dust from choosing patterns later and pleases eyes that like a little liveliness without decoration. He lets the edge dry face down on sticks, then aunties the waste and smooths once a long cloth to say, there, no harm done. The free end papers return to the bench. He checks their adhesion with a finger's careful slide from gutter outward. No wrinkles. The hinge answers the most important voice with a low willingness, not a groan. He lays a small, faint line of paste under a lifted corner where his I found a future that thin edge invited to stay politely. The bone folder's rounded back smooths it down. The paper agrees to remember. A gentle aside, the best time to correct errors is when they are still only plans. Paste, when thin and timely, prevents arguments. Now the first opening, no flourish, only a lesson. He holds the closed book upright on the bench and lowers the front board to the surface. The text block remains standing. He takes a handful of leaves at the back, maybe a quire, and bends them gently toward the board, letting the hinge learn the idea. He does the same at the front, then a little more at the back, then the front again, walking inward by gatherings. The spine flexes in a measured bow, the grooves clarify their work. The shoulders remembered they were made by persuasion, not force. When he reaches the middle, he smooths both sets of leaves flat and closes the book. The joints have been taught, not commanded. He opens it once for reading, near the middle, and listens. No crack. The spread lies willing, the lines do not lean into the gutter, and the headbands rest where they should, more guardian than ornament. He lifts two leaves and lets them fall, hearing the whisper of paper greeting paper. The book knows how to be opened now without calling attention to its lessons. On the backboards inside, he pastes small binders ticketed no bigger than a fingernail, name, lane, and year in tiny type. It sits in the corner near the hinge as if it had been there from the start. Tickets are soft. Signatures. They say someone cared without asking the page for applause. He tidies the bench in the way a day expects. Paste pot lid straightened, brush rinsed, until the water remembers to be clear. Letters put back in their drawer in the order the alphabet prefers. Folder wiped on clean paper until it squeaks. He leaves the book standing a while longer between its neighbors so cloth can finish its decision to be smooth. The room smells of paste's last sweetness, of leathers unspoken patience, and of paper warmed by attention. A visitor at the door, a schoolmaster, asks if a ledger might be ready next week. The binder nods with the kind of nod that counts time in steps, not in dates. He lifts the finished volume, now dressed and named, and slips it into a simple paper wrapper folded from a sheet of waste, a clean envelope taut on the spot by the folder's edge. He writes a short title on the wrapper's spine in a steady hand and places the parcel on a shelf where work waits without sulking. A final aside for this hour. Books that behave do so because someone behaved for them. First edges not hurried, spines talk to bow, cloth that sits where it belongs. And titles that read without insisting. He looks once more at the bench, finds nothing asking, and lets the pressed cheeks rest opened by a finger's width, the shop's own way of breathing out. Beyond the window, a barrow rattles along the lane. Inside, the air settles as if the room were a page ending on its own period. If your breathing has taken on this finished rhythm name, edge, open, rest, stay with it. In the next part, simple lines will be tooled into the cloth for a frame that invites the hand. The foredge may learn a humble pattern for a jig thumb, and the volume will meet its owner with the ceremony of a parcel set down gently on a clean counter. The afternoon slips toward the kind of light cloth understands. The finished volume stands between two calmly dressed neighbors. Its spine keeps the round it learned without thinking about it. Today it receives to small graces, quiet lines that guide the hand to the cover, and a home that will make dust mind its manners. He draws the bench closer to the window and brings out a narrow palette, the straight brass tool that lays a single rule. The finishing stove murmurs at the back with charcoal the color of tea. He sets the palette near the grate until warmth travels from metal into handle, and then rests it on the stand while he watches his breath leave and return. Too much heat will scold cloth, too little will only whisper without being heard. He tests on a scrap, a single line pressed without gold along a trial piece of the same weave. The cloth answers with a darker thread of itself, not shine, not scorch, just direction. A gentle aside belongs here. Leather remembers impressions like stories. Cloth remembers like habits. Blind lines on cloth are a wakefulness taught softly. They help the finger find edges and give the eye something to follow without insisting on being seen. He lays two thin brass guides on the board, a thumb's width from the edges, and fixes them with a dab of paste that will release later with a polite tug. The book lies open but closed, boards down, spine toward him. He warms the palette again, wipes it on clean paper that squeaks, and sets the heel at the head turning. One measured pull from head to tail along the guide leaves a rule that looks like clarity. He turns the book and repeats along the tail, then the foredges, completing a rectangle of quiet. A second pass, lighter, convinces the cloth that the first was not a mistake. He lifts the guides carefully. The paste lets go with dignity. Now head caps. The head and tail, where cloth turned over the spine, are pinched into small, rounded collars that protect the fold and please the eye. He dampens the turn-ins edge with the smallest kiss of water, presses with the bone's rounded tip in a rolling motion, and tucks the corners in with a thumbnail top buyers. The headband peaks like a tidy horizon between cloth and text. He repeats at the tail. Both caps sit, not proud, just sure. He returns the book to its feet and runs a forefinger down each groove, defining the joint where cloth prefers to live. The grooves answer with a sound that is half feel, half quiet, paper moving where paper likes to move. He opens the front board a few inches and smooths the free end paper with a broad brush of air. No paste now, only reassurance. While the volume rests, he measures for its slipcase. Pasteboard is chosen by grain as carefully as for boards. A case that pulls against itself will soon teach corners to argue. He marks and cuts 3 pieces for the inner tray, back, foredge wall, and head and tail walls. The knife travels slowly along the rule, no heroics, only inevitability. Joints receive linen strips pasted across their back so the tray will flex kindly at the edges rather than split later when a hurried hand returns the book with more enthusiasm than skill. The inner tray finds its box, He glues the 3 walls to the back with paste that spreads thin, presses each corner square against a small rectangle block, and ties the whole with a cotton ribbon while it thinks. The ribbon leaves only suggestion, no marks. He checks with a set square he has used so long that its corners have become friends rather than angles. A gentle aside, some binders build the outer case first and let the tray learn to suit. Others begin with the tray so the case will honor what it holds. This shop prefers to measure from the guest outward. While the tray sets, he cuts 2 large boards for the outer case, one for the spine and back, one for the foredge face. The spine piece is scored lightly where the hinge will live, top to fold without breaking. He chooses a covering paper plain wove, a muted gray-blue firm enough to resist corners, soft enough to take paste without pooling. He brushes paste from center to edges on the paper, lays the spine backboard onto it with the score running true, rubs down through clean waste sheet, and turns in the margins. The foredge face board receives the same dressing. Both pieces dry enough to forget their wetness while he lines the tray with plain cream paper, cut just smaller so edges do not lift with use. When the paper feels calm, he brings tray and case parts together. The dress spine back piece meets the tray's back. Paste runs in a steady, thin seam. Linen guards that he set on the tray earlier receive their partners. The bone folder smooths without insisting. He adds the foredge face panel last, keeping a narrow throat just enough to admit the book with a breath left over. He checks until square feels inevitable, and then sets the slipcase under a light weight of book-shaped stone wrapped in cloth to settle. Back to the volume. He fits it inside the drying case as a rehearsal, first with slips of waste paper to keep any damp from thinking ambitious thoughts about cloth, then briefly without. It glides in with the slow ease he likes, a little air, no scrape, no sway. He lets it out again and stands it on its feet while the case finishes learning its shape. The foredge, already lightly speckled earlier, receives one more kindness for the finger that will push this book home and out again many times, a small, invisible polish along the outer sheet's edge. He takes a rag saved only for this linseed touched years ago until it forgot how to wet anything and rubs a whisper along the foredge of the free-in paper. The page becomes less interested in catching and more interested in representing the rest of the book. No shine, only reluctance to fray. A visitor passes the door and leaves a folded broadsheet news from the key and a gently colored advertisement for a chandler's shop. He tears a neat rectangle from the margin to become a temporary belly band, a pencil note title. Binder's Lane will keep the parcel's identity when it sits on a counter among others, temporary. Wrappings are courtesies that save introductions. He returns to the slipcase. The weight lifts. The case has remembered its angles. He pastes a small pull of cloth inside the mouth, a ribbon anchored under the tray lining so the book can be lifted with kindness instead of pinched. He sets the volume home, grasps the pull, and tests the welcome. The book slides out and sits in the hand as if it had done so for years. A gentle aside, guardianship in object form is mostly corners done well. A case that offers help where clumsiness begins makes readers braver and books older. He places the finished case and book on the window shelf and watches the light find the blind rules across the cloth, then leave them alone. The head caps hold their small, rounded shadows. The label reads as if it had always been there. He writes a single line in the ledger date, customer cloth, Headbands blue, straw case paper gray blue, and adds a dot that in this shop means everything even. The bench titties itself under his hands. The palette cools and returns to its drawer face up. The guides are wiped free of paste and stacked with their quiet family. The ribbon goes back to its peg. The finishing stove gives a last breath and becomes metal again. He wipes a thumb along the bone folder's edge to confirm smoothness. It smiles back by squeaking once on clean paper. He holds the book wrapped in its paper band, lowers it into the slipcase, sets both in a cloth bag meant for deliveries, and knots the cords with the merciful knot that believes in being untied by a single pull. The room feels like a page with the last sentence complete. If your breathing has settled into this bench-like rhythm, press, line, pinch, case, keep it. In the final part, the parcel will travel down the lane, a ledger will receive its coin, a first reader will open the book the way it was taught to be opened, and the shop will close with tools facing inward, and the press's cheeks a finger apart, breathing out a day well finished. The parcel waits in its cloth bag like a polite guest who knows the door will open soon enough. The binder ties his apron behind the peg, wipes the bench with one long pass of a clean cloth, and turns the press screws a half turn open, which is how the room prefers to breathe while he is away. He lifts the bag, feels the book's square shape settle into his hand, and steps into a lane that already knows his footfall. Stones underfoot still remember last night's damp. A barrow creaks to turns ahead. A woman tips water from a step, careful not to teach the gutter bad habits. At the corner, a cat chooses the sun. The parcel rests in the crook of the binder's arm, the slipcase within keeping its own counsel. He walks without announcing himself. Deliveries do not require ceremony. They require straight corners and a hand that will not explain them. The schoolmaster's door opens to his knock that is almost not a knock to knuckles. Once, then the patience that makes a second unnecessary. A bell answers like a coin at the bottom of a cup. The room inside smells of chalk stove and paper that has taken notes. A tall desk leans into light from a high window. The schoolmaster, in a coat that favors function, looks up and remembers to smile the way someone does when a thought returns before it is missed. "Good day," the binder says, the sort of greeting a parcel uses. He sets the bag on the counter and loosens the knot, the kind made to be unmade by a single pull. The cloth size, the paper belly band shows its penciled line. He slips off the band, lifts the slipcase by its ribbon pull, and sets it gently on the wood. The case's paper looks like cool weather. Its corners are plain and confident. He draws the book out, cloth muted, blind rules sitting like quiet guidance, label reading as if it had always read. He sets the spine in the schoolmaster's palm and watches the moment when weight teaches itself to. The hand it should serve, he says, which is the fullest compliment a binder gives his own work. The first opening belongs to the owner, but the binder offers the small lesson he teaches all customers who wish to hear it. He brings the front board down, leaves the text standing, folds a few gatherings from the back forward, then a few from the front back, walking inward until the book lies open with its hinge understanding courtesy. "Like that the first time," he says, "and the next times it will remember." The schoolmaster nods without looking up. His fingers are already listening. Pages whisper. Ink sits calm. The headbands make tidy horizons at the edges of sight. The schoolmaster runs a finger along the groove near the spine, not testing, only learning. It opens without complaint, he says a reader's finest praise. He turns to the middle, then to the end, then closes the book and holds it upright as if it were a well-behaved student asked to stand. It stands. Coin appears without clatter. The ledger on the counter opens to a page that has walked this year politely. The binder writes a line date, cloth color of headbands, slipcase, and draws a short stroke he uses for no trouble. He accepts the coin with a hand that counts by feel. It is the right weight. He does not weigh satisfaction. He sees it in the way the schoolmaster rests the book on the desk with the spine aligned to the desk's edge as if already practicing respect. A gentle aside belongs here. Finished work ends twice, once when the maker leaves it, once when the new hand understands how to begin. Today, both endings are quiet. The ribbon pull slides. The book returns to its slipcase without argument. The schoolmaster sets the case on a shelf above his desk where dust will have to ask permission before settling. Another ledger next week, he says, as though the future were a page already ruled. The binder nods. A door knows how to close itself. When both sides have said enough, back in the lane, the afternoon gathers itself into squares of light. The cloth bag is lighter now, a small emptiness that feels like tidiness rather than loss. He returns to the shop and lets the latch lift the way it prefers them, then fingers, then shoulder. Inside, the air has waited without impatience. Tools still face inward. The pressed cheeks remain a finger apart. The bench's clean strip shines where a cloth passed. He hangs the bag on its peg and goes first to the paste pot. The lid is set straight. The paste inside has slept into a cool skin that will help it last until tomorrow. He lifts the brush and rinses it in a bowl by the window until the water stops pretending to be milk and remembers to be clear. The brush arranged bristles up in its jar, thanks in by taking the shape it can sleep in. Boards are stacked by size, green all turned the same way so no pile will teach a wrong lesson to its neighbor. The awls lie in their roll. He touches the leather ones. A small weight his hand expects. He runs a fingertip along the bone folder's back. It squeaks. Quietly the sound good tools make when they have no reason to argue. On the press, to text blocks from the morning rest between boards. He loosens the screws a half turn, checks that edges sit with edges, and tightens again to the exact reluctance that says paper is being persuaded rather than held. He writes a short line in his shop ledger, 2 rounded, 1 laced, 1 trimmed, stove clean, case paper low, good day, and adds a dot. In this room, a dot means even. He crosses to the door and props it with a wedge planed to a kindness that never splits the jam. Evening considers coming in and decides to wait until the latch is ready. He returns the finishing stove's tray to its drawer, empty and cool. The palette and letters sleep in their nests. The rule and square lean without leaning. On the shelf, the slipcase papers wait under a board with a stone on top so they will not learn to curl. He takes a slow sweep of the floor with a broom that prefers long, soft sentences. Paper crumbs, thread tails, and the thin rinds from paring leather join the polite population in the bin tomorrow. Some will wrap a parcel. Some will keep paste from pretending to spill. The rest will lie in a drawer whose bottom likes quiet company. Last, he opens the window a hand's breadth to let the room exchange air without forgetting itself. The street outside borrows a square of the shop's coolness. The shop borrows a square of the street's lake sun. He straightens the bundle of cord on its peg, smooths the apron on the hook, and turns the press screws so their cheeks are neither touching nor apart the shop's breathing position. He pauses once more at the bench and lays his palm flat where the day began. Wood returns its temperature, warm now from hands. He does not thank it out loud. The room understands. He dims the lamp, draws the latch, and steps into a lane whose stones have shifted from silver to pewter. Behind the door, the boards lean, the press waits, the labels do not announce themselves, and the air folds itself neatly to be opened in the morning. If your breath has learned the bookbinder's pace measure persuade, rest let it keep you. The day's thread has been trimmed and laid back in the drawer. Nothing is waiting. Now these quiet stories will keep you gentle company while you rest. Thank you for listening. And sweet dreams.